Hello, this is Elizabeth Chapman.
Hi, Liz. We're just waiting to get started here in a minute or so.
Okay.
So is Liz out there? Okay. All right. Jennifer, are you ready? All right. Should we go ahead and get started?
Thank you.
This is my first time, so I hit it a little harder than you. I guess we'll go ahead and get started. First item of business is old business.
Roll call.
Roll call. Okay. Go ahead and Jennifer. take
Sure.
over.
Commissioner O'Connell Chapman,
Here.
Commissioner Adams,
Here.
Commissioner Davis. Here. Commissioner Gilbreth.
Here.
Commissioner Stewart.
Here.
Commissioner Coons.
Here.
Commissioner Clemens.
Here.
And Commissioners Wilson and Gillette are excused today. No.
Okay. So we'll go ahead and get the meeting started. Old business first, which is the approval of the November 20th, 2018 meeting summary. Any discussion? Questions?
One typo. Sure. On the bottom of page 3, the last paragraph pertaining to Acme Manufacturing, David Foster, his title, presented in updates.
Yeah, I actually circled that as well.
Update, just singular, so minor.
No, I saw that too.
Anybody else? Entertain a motion.
I would move that we adopt the minutes for the November 20th meeting with the amendment as proposed by Commissioner Stewart.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, I think
Aye.
Now we're going to move on to new business. And it looks like, Brandy, is there any public comment or any?
I did not receive any cards, but is there any member from the public that would like to speak to the commission? I don't think so.
I guess we'll move on then to the first rulemaking hearing, which is the amendment to 6 CCR 1007-2, Part 1, Section 1.7.5, the regulations pertaining to solid waste sites and facilities, waste grease annual fees. So whoever that is up.
Morning, Commissioners. Thank you. Can you hear me okay? I've got a cold coming
Would you
in.
go ahead and identify yourselves?
I'm Anna Malett. I'm an Environmental Protection Specialist, Waste Tires and Waste Grease. Today I'll be representing the Waste Grease Program.
Morning, Commissioners. I'm David Snap. I'm the Unit Leader for the Materials Management Unit.
And I'm Jeff Stalter. I'm the Administration Program Manager for the division.
And I'm Lucas Stex with the Colorado Attorney General's Office.
We were here back in November. We're requesting a decrease in our fees for haulers and waste grease facilities. I'm going to try to work this. Under Section 18, we are required to get fees for registered haulers who haul waste grease 55 gallons or more, and for the facilities here in the state of Colorado. At this time, and as of today, we have a new change in numbers. In November, I mentioned that we would be seeing an increase in the trucks and in haulers coming in. Well, this slide was, as of this morning, we have a total of 76 waste grease haulers and facilities in the state of Colorado, 62 haulers. The surprise to me this morning when I was doing the annual report numbers that are required by Section 18 is that some of my companies had combined, but we also had new companies coming in. So we ended up with 177 trucks at this time. We are collecting $570 per truck in fees. This is quite an increase from 161. Of the 14 facilities still in operations, 5 pay the waste grease fee. The other 9 pay the solid waste user fee. At this time also, according to our annual report, we had almost 20,000 loads of waste grease taken to these 14 facilities. That comes to a total of over 40 million gallons of waste grease. It's a small program with a big effect. It also is ran by 0.5 of a full-time employee, yours truly. And during that time, I've conducted quite a few inspections for the fiscal year 2018. I inspected 4 of the facilities, 7 haulers, and these were the haulers in the far reaches of Colorado, the Cortez area, Durango area, down in southern Colorado. We've issued 5 compliance advisories and done 6 file reviews. So it's kept us kind of busy. However, Brandy.
On the right.
Yes. $570 is a lot of money that we're taking in for the amount of work we're doing. And it's Jeff will explain the numbers because I just know that every year I have to collect the checks and go through the paperwork. We issue $25 per set of temporary decals. This is for when vehicles break down, that they need to use another septic truck or another truck, or they're leasing a vehicle. We don't issue many of those, probably just maybe 5 to 10 maximum per year. And as for personal users of waste grease or biofuel, 0. That we have nobody registered to do that at this time. So the fees, the amount of money for what we're doing, we would like to give these folks a break and are requesting a change in the fees. I'm going to add, did it jump? Oh, there we go. This is how it would read in the regulations. So you would be seeing, we're asking to go 50% down to knock this down a bit. It's still quite a sum of money. And I believe you all should have a copy of this. I'm going to let Jeff Salter explain this because, well, he understands the financials and I do the inspections.
Hi, so I've led everyone to believe. So the first table, this is pretty much the same one I went over a few months ago, but I'll run through it again. Can everyone hear me on this? I'm not sure. Pretty loud anyway. Currently right now, we're bringing in about twice as much revenue than we need to oversee the program. So if you look at where, based off the current numbers and the money we're bringing in, we're pulling in about $100,000. Our actual expenditures, as Anna mentioned earlier, roughly half an FTE, comes to approximately 50 grand, give or take a little bit, but it's pretty close. So that's given us about 50 grand, 51,000 in excess revenue that we can't really use it. It's not in the good public interest to incur more revenue than we need to oversee the program, plus or minus a little buffer for unforeseen changes. So currently, since the program's inception, we have about 164 grand that was essentially kind of over collected. So at the end of this fiscal year, that bottom line number is where we're projected to be in terms of a balance, an excess balance. So we're proposing to reduce the fee to bring us more into compliance. So it's coming down by roughly about half. So now, our annual revenue comes to about 50,000, 51,000 and change or so. Now that could change given Anna's new numbers. That revenue could, of course, come up or come down depending on how many people are in or out of the program. Again, the annual expenditures stay roughly around $50,000, giving us an excess balance or reserve at the end of the year of $680. We still have the excess reserve of about $215,000 in the fund, and that, if the fees stay steady, we'll slowly start to chew into that as the program gets more expensive, as the FTE costs more, depending if we want to do more outreach, whatever it is. In the state, our statute are required to keep no more than 16.5% of the prior year's expenditures, which we are in excess of. However, funds with less than $200,000 or more in expenditures are exempt from that statute. So this isn't in the grand scheme of things in the state, this is budget dust per se, but to the stakeholders involved, it's not insignificant, but it is good practice for us to bring these fees in alignment into what it costs us to oversee the program.
That's it. Questions?
Yeah, I have a question and a comment. My question is in regard to the personal use of the waste grease as biofuel. I'm curious as to why you think we have 0 users at this point in time.
Coons, that's easy. When this program was first put together, yellow grease was part of it. And that's where personal use and biofuels came in. Waste grease, what we're pulling out of grease traps, you're not making soap or putting it
Yeah.
in your vehicle. It's pretty nasty. So we kept it just in case somebody came up with a brilliant idea. And to date, yeah, no. So it was part of the yellow grease issue.
Great. And then my comment is just, I think we should find a way to highlight this. I congratulate the division on being good stewards of the taxpayers and stakeholders' money. It feels rare that we see decreases in fees. So congratulations.
Thank you. When we spoke with a lot of the stakeholders called, and they were like absolutely amazed once I explained to them that we needed to lower the fees. They were thrilled to death.
Thank
A
you.
lot of rural areas.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments?
This is Commissioner O'Connell Chapman. I have a question about why reduce the fee instead of increase the support, staffing, inspections, outreach.
You take that one.
Well, one of the things about this program is it's actually kind of duplicate effort. A lot of the facilities are actually regulated in some other capacity already. 2 or 3 of the facilities would be regulated as centralized wastewater treatment facilities under water quality, or the transfer stations. So there's already oversight. A lot of these guys are actually septic haulers as well, which is overseen at the county level a lot of the time. So we don't feel like there's a real need right now. We're not seeing a lot of violations during inspections. So right now we just don't see the need to increase our efforts in this sector.
Commissioner, also, when I've done this is Anna Malett, when I've done the inspections, the compliance advisories that I issued 6 for 2018 were for missing the annual report. So they were able to get that in within a few months. But we haven't seen really any major violations at all with these folks. The haulers are pretty conscientious of what they're doing because they do haul septic also.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is you're confident in reducing the funds because there's really no public safety to be gained by using the funds to increase oversight.
That is true.
Okay.
Quick question. Would there be a benefit of reducing it further? I mean, you're speaking to the 6 compliance advisories for the past year, and it sounds like everyone's more or less compliant.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think a 0.5 FTE is justified throughout? Of course, I shouldn't ask you.
Yeah.
Sure you do.
Well, yeah, and this is the trend. We have a program to implement, and it's been costing about this much. So we have an obligation through the statute to go out and provide at least some oversight. And we found that through the number of inspections and time that Anna's committed to it, that it's been effective. And so, yeah, I do think, we could look at that in the future as well and continue to track our trends in terms of compliance. And if the trends stay as they are, then we could look at lowering that fee farther. But right now, we think, in terms of the minimum of what is required, this is appropriate.
Okay.
Guess that's all the questions we have. Okay. So I would entertain a motion, and I would look to you guys for guidance. Anybody in the public would like to comment on this issue in front of us right now? There being none.
Now you may close the record.
Okay, I'm going to close the record. Do I need to do anything else other than ask for a motion? You want to give guidance on what type of a motion we need for this situation?
It is just your standard motion of approval because it's solid waste.
Okay. Would anybody care to?
I'll do it.
Thank you.
I move that we adopt the proposed rules regarding or pertaining to solid waste, site and facilities waste grease annual fees, along with the statement of basis and purpose and regulatory analysis.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
That sounds like unanimous. Very good.
Thank you.
Moving on to the next item. Are you guys still up? You're going. Okay. See you later. We'll move on to the next item, which is another rulemaking hearing for amendment to 6 CCR 1007-3, Part 262-14A, regulations pertaining to hazardous waste generator improvement rule. And it looks like we have David Foster.
Yeah, you guys got me for a while, so buckle in, I guess.
You have the floor, sir.
All right. First off, I'm David Foster. I'm an environmental protection specialist with the Hazardous Waste Compliance Assurance Unit. So today, first off, I'll have 4 rulemakings for you guys. 2 of them are basically kind of corrections to rulemakings we did in the past that we found some errors that some of them actually the public pointed it out to us to help clarify some issues there. Another one is the manifest rule, which is basically just a EPA rule that as a state we are required and mandated to adopt. And the 4th rulemaking will be a delisting petition for hazardous waste that we did 2 separate informationals on those. So you guys should be kind of up to speed on that. So the first one today is regulations, some changes, amendments to the haz waste generator rule, some corrections that we need, like I said, that were kind of brought up to us via the public and also kind of noticed after these rules went into effect. We adopted a ton of changes to the rules back in June of 2018. The state of Colorado, we've always been, or not always been, but since 2006 or so, we're more stringent than EPA in regards that we require very small quantity generators that generate F-listed wastes, which are F1, F2, F4, and F5, to notify with us and also pay annual fees. They also are required, if they receive a self-cert checklist, to complete that per the regulations. The changes that we need to make is when we made the changes in June of 2018, we accidentally included that the VSQGs are required to comply with Part 263, which is standards applicable to transporters of hazardous waste, which would include requirements to manifest, requirements to use a notified haz waste transporter. The feds or EPA have never required this, and we did not mean for this to occur. So we're changing the regulations to exempt the VSQGs from requirements of Part 263. When we made these changes in 262.14, we also failed. We exempted the VSQGs in that section from complying with the self-cert that they're required to do. In other parts of the regulation, they are required to do it. So this kind of gave a wrong message, conflicting messages that they actually are required to comply with the self-cert checklist. And also, when we made the changes, notification requirements are located at 262.18. We made it look like that all VSQGs are required to notify when actually we just want the F1, F2, F4, and F5 VSQGs to notify. So our proposed amendments are add the requirement under VSQGs for 262.43, which is a part of the regulations which require them, if they receive a self-cert checklist, to complete it, comply with that regulation. That's kind of, it's already included at 262.10 for them to abide by this requirement. So we just want to add it into 262.14 within the VSQG regulations. Here we want to just expand on the requirements of VSQGs that it's only applicable for them to notify if they are generating F1, F2, F4, or F5. So here's how the new amended section will read. You guys should already have this. Basically, we're taking out the part of 262.18 for all VSQGs, which is the notification requirements, adding in 262.43, which is the part of the regulations for self-cert. requirements, getting rid of the and parts 264, which that meant part 263 was included, which we do not want that to be included. And then just the last sentence clarifies the notification requirements for VSQGs of F1, 2, 4, and 5.
Can I just ask you a quick question on that?
Yeah.
So the way that it reads now is, it's on, don't worry. It says, not subject to the requirements of part 262, and then the parenthetical, and then you have through 268.
Mm-hmm.
Is that, so you're meaning parts 262 through 268?
So except for those sections are not subject to those. So before it meant because there's a 263, so that meant that they were subject to those requirements of 263 because we did not basically exempt them out of that. Does that make sense? So, and we didn't mean for that to happen. They should be not subject to all the requirements except for 262.9 through 262.14 and 262.43.
Okay. Thank you.
That makes sense? Okay.
Just wanted to make sure that was.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a little confusing for sure. So, so that's kind of that proposal in a nutshell. Pretty, not a lot going on there, just some clarifications, making sure we're consistent in all areas of our regulations.
Commissioners, any questions for David?
Just one, David. Remind me, and I apologize for my ignorance, remind me of what types of hazardous waste are included under F1, F2, F4, and F5.
Sure. For us, the main generators would be dry cleaners, which generate an F2, which is PERC, a solvent for that. Then also we see a lot of auto bodies that use solvents for cleaning of like their paint guns, which was if they contain like a carcinogen. For example, toluene would be an F005. So some of our, they don't generate a lot of waste, but there's a lot of generators throughout the state. This was a way for the state to capture all them and to kind of know what their numbers were. And also the self-cert kind of is an easier way for us to ensure compliance with the regulations for those folks.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else? Quick question.
Yeah.
Approximately, this is just sort of a background question. How many VSQGs are there in Colorado approximately?
I mean, the notified ones, we probably have over 1,000 that are notified, but that are.
Does that roll through? Is that sort of a random notification or?
No, that's the ones that have to notify
Notify us.
via if they're generating F1, 2, 4, or 5, and that number might be high.
Mm-hmm.
But then generators that aren't notified that are VSQG, I mean, there's no way for us to know that without them notifying. So, I mean, somebody could generate 3 gallons of, paint thinner.
Mm-hmm.
That's not an F1 or F2, and we would never know that they're generating that waste. So that's definitely an unknown number for us. So.
Sure. And they may not do it every year. It might just be a random.
Sure. Yeah, they might do a cleanup.
What percentage of those get the self-cert request?
For VSQGs, all the ones that fit into the categories of dry cleaners, and we're no longer doing the auto body self-certs, but we also have implemented a new VSQG self-cert for healthcare facilities that Dan Getz kind of implements and runs that program. So I don't know the exact number of the VSQG healthcare facilities, but they don't necessarily generate the F1, 2, 4, or 5. So they're not required to notify, but because they're in the healthcare system and it's kind of a niche sector for us, they're required to do the self-serve.
So I'm going to age myself. I was actually involved in the committee that at one point decided to add, at the time it was called conditionally exempt small quantity generators, to the system and have them actually pay into the system. When we looked at the number that was out there and also the resources that were being expended for assistance, compliance assistance, and also I was a prime example at Ball we had 2 large quantity generator sites, but then we had a number of conditionally exempt sites. And so we recommended as a committee that they start registering and paying into the system because, again, there's a lot of them, and they were a big population that was accounting for some cost and also generating a significant amount of waste. And I would, when you look at it collectively, and the second piece to that is, as a person now that works in the city and county sector, when we go out and look and do air inspections and other things, again, there's a large number of small quantity generators or very small quantity generators out there. And a lot of them are probably the most unfamiliar still with some of the regulations, especially with air and waste. And so again, getting them into the system and accounting for some of these things, I think is pretty crucial.
And that leads to my final question was, you know, in terms of once this is approved or we agree with this process and becomes, you know, in the regs, do you notify the VSQGs or how would there be some sort of follow-up action or it would just be?
No, I mean, they've already been complying with this requirement since 2006, so they should be aware of it already. Like I said, it was just an oversight on our part to include it in this section of the regulations. It was in the independent requirements section where this is the exemptions for getting a permit part. So like I said, we saw some confusion via the regulated community saying, why is it you're sending, you know, kind of mixed messages, and this is a way for us to correct it, which they already have been aware of this for a long time. So.
Okay. Commissioner O'Connell Chapman, did you have anything to ask?
Yeah, I think the question you just asked addressed what I was asking, which is, have these VSQGs already been over complying, or they have been complying with what we're proposing as the amended rule because it was recognized that they didn't need to meet those more stringent transporter requirements?
No, they've always followed the requirements. It's a technical error on our part. Back in June of 2018, we basically forgot to add in the through 268 and meant to exclude part 263 for the transporters. That's always been part of the EPA's requirements for back then conditionally exempts, that they are not required to comply with part 263, like I said, which includes manifesting and offering their waste to a transporter that is notified as a hazardous waste transporter. So that's never been a requirement, and I don't see it being one in the future.
That it?
Thank you.
Thank you. So there being no further questions, I guess we'll open it to public comment. If there's anybody in the audience that would like to come forward and comment on this. With that, I'll close the record and I would entertain a motion.
So these regulations are more stringent than the EPA, so you'll need to use that language in your motion.
You.
I'll make a motion. I move that we adopt the proposed rules regarding Amendment 6, CCR 1007 through 3, Part 262, regulations pertaining to hazardous waste generator improvement rule amendments.
And the accompanying statement and basis and purpose.
Oh, okay. And the accompanying statement of basis and purpose, and the finding therein that the rule is necessary to protect the public health and environment of the state.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Motion carries unanimously. Okay, so let's move on to the next item. Another rulemaking hearing. It looks like David Foster is going to stay right where he is.
Like I said, I'll be here for a while. So.
This is the amendment to 6 CCR 1007-3, parts 260, 262, 263, 264, and 265. Regulations pertaining to hazardous waste user fees for electronic hazardous waste manifest system.
Sure, and I kind of want to start out by saying that most of these regulations are part of the federal e-manifest rule. and are issued under the authority of the E-Manifest Act, and therefore they're going to be administered and enforced by the EPA. However, we are required to adopt these provisions basically to maintain program consistency. Typically, I don't see us ever enforcing on these. These, like I said, are administered and will be enforced by the EPA. Basically, the changes are some minor and technical changes that EPA has found they needed to make to this rule. So I just kind of want to go back through a background of it for you guys, and then if we have any questions, we'll go there. So first, the E-Manifest rule began in 2016 and was implemented in June of 2018 at a national level. We did first adopt it back in October of 2017 as required, as mandated by the federal, by EPA. So back in January of 2018, the user fees, which had been a work in progress, had finally were passed, and then states are required to adopt these user fees, which, like I said, will be administered and enforced by EPA. And so kind of go over how these fees will be handed down to generators and also to the transport or treatment, storage, and disposal facilities. So the E-Manifest rule mandated a couple items: who pays for this, payments and sanctions, the new manifest form that will be used under the E-Manifest rule. There is an E-Manifest advisory board, some of the non-fee requirements, and any amendments to that. So this is kind of going back a ways just to give you guys an overview of the E-Manifest rule. Is, like I said, we don't really pay attention to this on a day-to-day basis. So just kind of background information. So the fee methodology is based on system, setup cost, operations, maintenance costs, etc. There'll be a separate fees going forward based on if you're using electronic manifest only, paper manifest only. Right now, as inspectors, we're not seeing any, I haven't seen any yet, any facilities in Colorado using just the straight E-Manifest. There's some using a hybrid form. So they use a paper and kind of the E-Manifest part of it. And then it's then kind of used by the TSD to input into the E-Manifest system, or it's just a straight paper copy, and then the TSD is charging that facility an extra amount of money to then convert it for E-Manifest as required by EPA. The fee schedule will be updated every 2 years. And the system is based on, it's a fee-based and also sanctions for non-payment. So if people aren't paying into it, there's going to be penalties and or some enforcement actions against those. Who's typically going to pay for the E-Manifest? It's going to be the receiving facilities designated on the manifest. Like I said, in Colorado, we have basically two of those right now, which is Clean Harbors and Veolia. So they would theoretically be responsible for paying for the E-Manifests that are for waste that is terminated at their facility. They do have to submit the final manifest copy. And it says here, no fees imposed on state government users. So basically this allows us as employees or state employees to use the E-Manifest system to check on, let's say we have a facility we may think be out of compliance, or on inspections, we're able to use that system maybe before we go out there to kind of see how much waste they're generating. Also, when we're on an inspection, they're not able to come up with their manifest, we should be able to use our access to My RCRA Online, which is the EPA version of where the manifests are located, to kind of look at a facility's manifest.
Have you been using that at all?
We use, not for the manifest portion, but we use that to check on their notification status when there's changes to generator status at a facility. We basically just updated our we have a new program called a co-echo, which is sort of going to take the place of paper inspection copies for us in the future. And of course, with the state, that takes a while, but we're done with kind of the first steps of that. The second steps would be us to kind of, along with the e-manifest paper reduction type, is we go into the field, we have all our stuff available on our tablets, laptops, which would include access to their manifest or kind of their notification generator status levels throughout their existence, who their contact people are, all that type of stuff. And then we would also be able to input our, what are called notice of inspections and all that type of stuff. Theoretically in the future, that's going to occur for us, which would kind of make everything paperless at the state level and then at the federal level, which it'll be awesome when it happens. And that's, the win is a big if, but hopefully we'll get there.
1 year project, 2 years, 3 years down the road?
They always say 6 months, so that means probably 2 years. So I don't know for sure. I think we got new laptops ordered or new tablets, and then soon along, I think that the next step will be there. So, so basically, that part is that states aren't required to pay into that to access that information. There'll be electronic billing to the TSDs, going to the Treasury Department, and like I said, there are penalties if there's payments aren't done in a timely manner. There's a change to the e-manifest form, to the manifest form to comply with the new e-manifest rule. The advisory board will be responsible, kind of what happened earlier with the waste grease. If there's need more money or less money, they will review the finances and decide if there needs to be changes to the fees based on incoming monies. So that non-fee related issues. So if there's like you'll see sometimes where maybe there's a problem during transport, they're not going to charge for changes to the manifest. They'd rather it be done in a timely and appropriate manner instead of charging for these type of occurrences that will happen during transport. So what we're looking at today mainly for us at the state level is there's changes to Part 260, 262, 263, and 264, 265. And these are basically to match up with the federal amendments and to keep us in line and consistent with the federal regulations. So any questions?
So David, who implements this regulation then, if it's an EPA rule?
Well, so it's under our authority, but it's under EPA or at the federal level for enforcement of like the user fees, all that type of stuff. Like I said, we haven't seen it as inspectors yet. Like if somebody, theoretically, if they're out of compliance with any of these e-manifest regulations, I don't know if we would see that as an inspector, because that would be at the TSDs typically, because they would be the ones, like I said, it's not a 100% requirement yet to use the e-manifest, and I believe it would be up to the treatment, storage, and disposal facilities to require the generators to use the e-manifest once EPA makes it a mandatory thing. So I think we could see issues at a permitted facility if they're delinquent, but we could never enforce that. Basically, we would pass that on to EPA for enforcement of delinquent payments and inappropriate use of not following the e-manifest rule, theoretically. Does that make sense?
A little bit. I'm just wondering, is EPA going to show up at some point? And
I imagine they will once. Yeah, because they've been with like in our region and there's kind of a new group of inspectors, and they've shown a more willingness to look at certain, like they kind of have mandates for certain portions of the regulations that they'll be looking into. Like right now, they're looking at subpart AA, BB, and CC, which are kind of the air emission requirements under RCRA. So they were mandated by headquarters. So they're actually going out with us and on their own for inspections in that area. And sometimes they do get, let's say, complaints that they feel like it would be better handled by EPA instead of at the state level. But theoretically, in the future, there could be a mandate for them to go look at how the e-manifest rule is being implemented and what the compliance rates are. Like I said, for us, it would only be Veolia and Clean Harbors are the only right kind of TSDs that kind of treat or store or landfill waste at this time.
Yeah, I mean, the other reason I asked, we were, I guess, fortunate enough to be inspected on this past quarter. We're not a TSD. We're
okay.
Small quantity.
Okay.
And so to be honest, and actually we might be very small or conditionally exempt.
Sure.
Whatever, but the inspector requested a copy of the manifest.
Sure.
So we kept a hard copy.
Uh-huh.
I think that potentially goes away in 2021.
Sure.
But there seemed to be potential disconnect for the CDPHE inspector to access the e-manifest system.
Sure.
And again, that might be just.
And like right now, we do have access to it. So I don't think that would be theoretically, or if we're there on an inspection and we're not able to access the e-manifest database, we would come back and figure out a way to do it in the future. If the paper copies aren't available to us on the day of inspection, we'd work with the facility, and then that is separate than the e-manifest rule. Like you are, required to have manifest on site for 3 years as a generator, but how you store those is they're not going to be required to be paper copies. You could, before this rule is in effect, some of them didn't have paper copies. They just scanned them in and they were available via computer database or something, and we were fine with that. But a generator, that's it'll be iffy for sure on, they will have to have 3 years of manifest, but what does that mean? For us, it would mean access to those manifests via computer, or maybe they are able to print out the e-manifest copy in the future. But I think we would go away from that and try to just access them online. Does that make sense?
It does, but I'll be honest, it was a little confusing for our folks on plant site.
Sure.
To understand CDPHE's role versus EPA's role,
Right,
if you
right.
will.
And I think it's going to be somewhat confusing until it's mandated that there's no more paper copies. I think that's something we're just going to have to deal with for the next 2 years, basically. So, and like I said, we'll never enforce on an issue like that if there's confusion, and as long as a facility after the inspection as incurred is able to provide that evidence that we did ship stuff on a manifest, here it is, sorry we didn't have it that day. We typically work really well with facilities to ensure that there are not going to be any penalties for something like that. So that work?
I think so. I mean, I'll take you at your word. Don't get me wrong. It's
right.
There was this, this kind of undercurrent of, well, EPA could do this.
Right.
We can't do that, or we're not going to do that. So again, we personally haven't had a lot of experience with EPA showing up to any of our facilities.
Sure.
So I don't know if that's going to be a new trend.
Yeah, like
goes on.
Yeah, like I said, I think for generators, it's not going to be a huge issue. It's going to be more an issue of the ones that are, like I said, the designated facility where the waste ends at is going to be responsible for that manifest getting into EPA's database. So I don't see generators really ever being enforced on this unless somehow their in facility isn't doing things the right way. But I think as an inspector, I would go to that in facility and not the generator if there's a problem with the manifest.
I have to say, I'm kind of listening to this, and again, coming from mostly the regulated side, any kind of ambiguity like this makes me uncomfortable.
Right.
And again, kind of the way the regulations are is you're responsible as a generator for pretty much everything that transpires. And so the only thing I would say is if there's some clear direction that could be given, like when you talk about doing paper copies, to me, that's counterintuitive to why we're doing it electronically.
Sure.
But I can understand, again, being able to demonstrate compliance. But if that's something that they need to do, I think there needs to be clear guidance as this transition goes through, what is going to be expected. Because I personally, if I had an inspection, I'd want to be able to have whatever's necessary to pass that inspection at the time and not have to deal with someone coming back or me having to go find additional records to provide. So I think whatever you guys can do as far as guidance during this transition period and what's really going to be expected during an inspection would be really helpful.
Okay. Yeah, and we do our yearly trainings where we train the regulated community where they have opportunities. We're kind of, since it is a transition period, we are kind of telling them what our expectations are on inspections in regard to manifest, like I said. And we haven't had really many issues with that. The only time we might have issues is if somehow it ends up at headquarters in a different state and we're not able to make contact with whoever's in charge of that database on that day. But typically that is taken care of within a week or something where they're able to.
Yeah, I'm thinking kind of just like just during this time period, you guys may want to consider.
Okay.
Because I worked at Chemical Waste Management and I worked for, Generator. And I can tell you whenever you're rolling out anything electronic, there's going to be glitches, there's going to be problems. And so just kind of being prepared for whatever they can do to make sure they have the documentation and they're not relying on someone else when, again, they're going to be potentially held accountable.
Okay.
Are you taking EPA with you so you can blame them on the?
Oh, yeah, always. Yeah. No.
Commissioner Stewart, anything? How about on this thing? You guys good? Okay, with that, I guess, is there anybody in the public who would care to comment on this?
I actually have a correction. So you all received an errata.
Oh, yes. Yep.
I just want to bring to your attention, not to interfere with public comment, but when you are considering the rule, you'll need to consider this as well.
I'm sorry.
So when you are making your motion and considering the rule, you'll need to consider this as well. So this is, there's certain incorporation by reference requirements under the APA that need to be met. Under our hazardous waste regulations, we have a general incorporation by reference provision at 260.10, but that references the 1993 version of the rule. So these incorporation by reference the version as adopted today, as when you adopt the rule, and don't reference back to the 1993 version since these changes were made to the EPA version of the rule in 2018. So we don't want to reference that original provision. So
when somebody makes a motion, they have to refer to that.
Yeah, just incorporate so we put it as an errata sheet, so you can just reference the errata sheet. There's going to be another one for Part 279. And so you'll want to just reference the title of the errata sheet when you make the motion.
So I guess I have to close the session first, right? Close the record. If you're finished.
I'm finished,
okay.
Yes.
I'm closing the record and.
But before we close the record, this is O'Connell Chapman.
Yes.
I noticed an inconsistency in the way some of the language was worded in one of the earlier on in the corrections, wherever it states his/her, it looked like that was corrected to his or her, but that's inconsistent. There are several places where it remains his/her. And if that is an important thing for us to have consistently in the document, this seems like the right time to change it.
Jennifer?
I'm going to defer to you on how you.
I'd like to defer to Randy on that.
Would you come on up?
I mean, I wouldn't have noticed it except that it's corrected like in the near line 200 something, but then later on when you get to line 342 and later, it's back to his/her. And I don't know how important that is, but might as well change things that need changing when we see them.
I mean, I think technically it means the same thing, whether it's spelled out or not. So it's just a matter of if we want to be consistent.
This is Randy Perella. I think on EPA's version 2, there probably is that inconsistency in rule to rule. I'm fine going through and checking the rule. I guess my personal preference would probably to do the his/her, but if the commissioners would prefer it the other way, I'm happy to change it that way too.
I think
Based
his-
on my reading, I think it says his/her more frequently than it says his or her.
So less corrections for me that way. Another reason to go that route.
And I personally do not care. It means the same thing to me.
Okay.
So Jennifer, how is that handled as part of the motion? Do we need to mention that that's going to be updated consistently through the document?
Yes.
All right.
Actually, before you go.
I'm not going.
Okay. I did have another question. If you're done, Liz, are you done with your questions?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. One thing that I was just wondering, really, as it relates to these changes, there's a lot of references to state-only waste. Does Colorado have much of that? What would be an example of that?
I think our state-only waste is stuff probably generated at PCAP.
Yeah, there are
Waste
a few
munitions.
unique listings that we have that EPA wouldn't have. Some of the,
We have like unexploded ordnance is one of them.
Gotcha.
I think like K901, 902,
Yeah.
or a couple of them.
Okay. And so those are waste that we consider waste, but EPA doesn't? Is that-
Well, EPA doesn't just because they're not generated. They're not part of their appendix for listed waste, where we added those in because they are generated only here in the state
Gotcha.
at that facility. So
I just wondered if that was language that we needed or didn't need. Sounds like we need it.
yeah, that's why we're adopting that. I mean, that's the only kind of part of it that we might see, and that's only. I mean, there's some requirements. It's not. I think this one.
That's okay. You've answered the question.
Okay.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So I guess I need to go back for public comment if there is any, since we've had some other questions back and forth. There being none, I'll close the record if we're at that point and entertain a motion. Go get them.
I move that we adopt the amendment to 6 CCR 1007-3, parts 260, 262, 263, 264, and 265, regulations pertaining to hazardous waste, user fees for electronic hazardous waste manifest system, along as amended by the errata sheet regarding the amendment of the waste regulations, hazardous waste e-manifest user fee rule, and with the corrections to consolidate and make sure that it's consistently used in the document his/her in references that apply, along with the statement of basis and purpose and regulatory analysis.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Al Chapman.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. And we'll move on to the next item. Again, David is not moving. So. This is another rulemaking hearing, and this is in regards to amendment to 6 CCR 1007-3, Part 279, regulations pertaining to hazardous waste, standards for the management of used oil.
There's two main portions of 279 that we're looking to amend today. First one is kind of to clarify, better describe how PCBs in used oil are regulated, and also to make our regulations line up with changes that we did make back in June under the new generator rule regarding VSQG listed waste mixed with used oil. So that's kind of what the basis for these changes are today. So kind of background, Part 279 is where we have our regulations for used oil, and used oil to be part of Part 279 is recycled and is not hazardous waste. Used oil standards apply to generators, transporters, processors, refiners, burners, and marketers of used oil. So the first amendment being proposed is kind of a more detailed explanation of how PSB contained in used oils will be regulated. Used oils with less than 50 parts per million PCBs will be regulated as hazardous waste and therefore under Part 279 as used oil. Any oil with greater than 50 parts per million PCBs is regulated under the Toxic Substance Control Act, TSCA. And this is all, we've always regulated it in this manner, but the wording now is consistent with the federal regulations, and it's easier for somebody reading the regulations to understand how these mixtures will be regulated, basically. It's just a clarification on that part. So next change is for mixtures of listed VSQG hazardous waste. So listed like could be F005, toluene, something that we might see at an auto body shop. And the mixture of that with used oil. In the past, under our regulations and under the federal regulations, mixtures of VSQG waste, if they do not show a characteristic, no matter if they're listed or not, were managed as a used oil. Colorado, we always thought that there could be some issues with this. So when we made changes to the generator rule in June of 2018, we incorporated a aspect into 262.13 for VSQGs that mixtures of VSQG listed waste and used oil will now be managed or be regulated as a hazardous waste. So meaning if they mixed, and this best example would be is if they somehow mixed a highly toxic, acute toxic P-listed waste, put that into their used oil in the past, and that would be managed as a used oil. Under the new regulation, then it would now be managed as a hazardous waste. So then, which sucks for them because it went from, you know, not having a hazardous waste to maybe 100 gallons of a hazardous waste by doing this, which is consistent with how small quantity generators and large quantity generators are regulated when it comes to mixtures of a listed waste. However, in that process, and this is kind of going into that also, but however, in the process of making the changes at Part 262.13 that do not allow the mixture of listed waste with used oil to be managed as a used oil, it has to be hazardous waste. We did not make those changes into Part 279 to clarify that in the used oil regulations. So this proposal is to eliminate Section 279.10b3 that requires used oil mixed with VSQG waste to be managed, well, as a hazardous waste. So we want to eliminate that portion of it to show that we're going to be consistent with Part 262.13. That kind of jumbled through that. I apologize for that. But basically, we're matching up with what changes we made earlier to clarify that used oil mixed with VSQG listed hazardous waste is not a used oil, but it is a listed hazardous waste.
David, comment. I believe the intent was to be a little more clear, a little more consistent.
Sure.
And maybe there's not better language, but when we looked at the proposed language, and I don't know if you have that proposed language anywhere you could post. Starting on line, it's under applicability, I think, line 72.
Mm-hmm.
There you go. It took us several reads to kind of figure this out.
Sure.
I understand the last two sentences. They're pretty cut and dry.
Sure.
If you're above 50 ppm, you're subject to Part 761.
Mm-hmm.
If you're below 50 ppm, you're subject to 279.
Sure.
The language that precedes that, again, this is just a comment. I don't know if there's a way to make it more clear, but it took several reads to make sure we kind of understood what it is you guys were trying to say.
Okay. And this is, so the first three lines are striked out, so you're fine with that being striked out.
And I know you're trying to catch dilution, and I know you're trying to catch exemptions, but it just gets pretty murky fairly fast. So,
and I think we took this straight from the EPA regulations. So
that makes sense.
That explains it. And that's why we were trying to be consistent with them. And maybe by doing that, we caused some confusion. But like I said, we're just kind of trying to clarify it and match up more consistently with the federal regs on that point. So we don't typically, theoretically, in the real world, we do see this, but not a ton. At the facilities that we regulate, we don't typically see a lot of PCBs in the used oil.
Is there any reason that we can't clarify the language and make it more clear? I mean, do we have to use the language that EPA has presented?
No, if we can come up with a better way less confusing way to state it.
I mean, if you'd like us to take a run at it, I can do that. I didn't necessarily want to make it a huge issue, but when somebody reads it a couple different times, that
sure, and it's
this
still
is their
causing
job,
issues. Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, I wouldn't mind taking a shot at it, or if anybody else.
I don't see. Doug, your thoughts on that matter?
We can go ahead and put this on hold.
Sorry.
We'll see this one. Doug Knapp, the Hazardous Waste Program Manager. We can go ahead and put it on hold and come up with some alternate language if that helps. But again, I think we're adopting the Fed, so we can't be more or less stringent than it. So we just have to be crafty around that.
Well, and my intent isn't to delay this, because I think in general, I understand the intent.
Okay.
And if we don't really have an opportunity to modify it much, then I don't want to take that time.
And I think
I'm actually going to just jump right in for a second. So you actually can't do that. You that would be ex parte communication with someone not at the meeting making rules. And so if you want to work at the table today and come up with some language, that is something that you can do, but you can't table it and then go home and work on it with a team of people and then come back, because then you can't vote on the rule or be part of, you'd have to recuse yourself. So
what Chris is suggesting is that he would like us to work through that briefly now and maybe modify the language, right, Chris?
If possible.
Oh, okay. Sorry. It sounded like maybe.
I don't have to go home if you don't want me to go home.
No, it sounded like you wanted to like table it and talk about it a different time and then come back. So maybe I misunderstood.
Guidance document.
That's what I was going to bring up. Is we have like a whole used oil guidance document, and we are in the process of revamping our generator guideline book. And one thing I could do is look at that guidance material and make sure that it is spelled out exactly what we want, and not maybe reference this, but also, I guess in layman's terms, the expectations for that regulation. Would that be something I could look at now and then at the next meeting, bring it back and see if that, I mean, that means you would have to, I guess, pass it today and then trust that I'm going to do that, but I don't.
Well, you could still table the rule.
Okay.
So if I may, I just want to present a different point of view. I am kind of a stickler for if there's language that is in federal regulation that we don't necessarily diverge too far from that. If there are guidance documents or other things where we can add more clarity, because I think a lot of times this is the rule, but there is other opportunities for how we apply rules and through guidance documents. So I would just put that out there if people are comfortable with it, because if you work in the PCB world, this is very clear. If you work with PCBs at all, this is very understandable. So I think we just need to be careful that we don't get too far from this when there's other mechanisms for being able to explain what we mean.
Yeah. So is the question with the first sentence is that because what it's saying is you can't dilute out your PCBs and used oil. If you do that, you're still subject to the requirement.
Agreed, but that's basically what the last sentence says as well, right?
Used oil is subject to regular dilution. No person may avoid. It is similar. I think the first sentence is more. The last sentence is you can't do it. The first sentence is if you did do it prior to measuring at 50, then you're still subject to Part 279. That's how I read it.
If we don't have the opportunity to modify the language because it's federal, then I don't necessarily want to make it a bigger issue. I think, to your point, from a guidance perspective and from a person out in the field to communicate that would be beneficial.
Yeah, like I said, I'll double check like I said, this is going to be kind of a new part to our used oil. So we are in the process of revamping a lot of our guidance documents. So it's a good time to look at that and to ensure that it's being explained in the appropriate manner to the regulated
Do you
community.
think the explanation, the statement of basis and purpose is sufficient for that change? Or is any clarity, you can add to that, to the statement of basis and purpose for any clarity as well of why that change is made?
The only thing I would say is when you're in the field, you don't go back to that document very often. To me, what needs to be in the guidance is three things. If you're below 50 PCBs, ppm, if you're above, and a statement about dilution. Those are the three scenarios that that's trying to cover.
Chris, to address your point, I just wanted to make a comment that we are allowed to modify the language, that the federal language. But in that regards too, for authorization purposes, when we submit a rule to EPA for review to become authorized for it, any change in that language, then we need to address as well. So if there is a way we can modify that sentence to make it more clear, I'm happy to do it. But as Laura pointed out too, any differences, EPA will question, why didn't you follow the language we have in there?
I think part of the question for Chris is, are you comfortable with the reg stated the way it is with guidance document that more clearly clarifies what the effective approach is?
Yes.
Any other comments from you guys on this one? Liz, any comment?
Yeah, thanks for remembering I'm out here.
Sorry about that.
I agree with the conversation that we've been having. I found that I had to read that a few times myself, but I wouldn't want to delay passing this over some language that can be clarified in guidance documents. One of my questions is, how big of an issue is this? How many facilities are currently mixing their hazardous waste with oil to dispose of it in a landfill? How many places is this going to affect?
Probably hardly any, I would think, but because typically used oil, transporters will do like a test to see if it's been mixed with, mainly with solvents, but if it's mixed maybe with some sort of a acutely toxic P-listed that's not flammable or something where these tests would pick up that, it's not going to see that. So they would reject a load if it does come back hot for if it has been mixed with a high amount of solvents. But typically we wouldn't know about it, I guess, if they were mixing it unless it comes back rejected by the used oil transporter. So I would say there's probably not a ton. It's just a way for us to put a message out to the regulated community, not that we don't want this to happen, because it could cause issues with public health and the environment if this is, there could be, I guess, random folks that are doing this, but as a whole, we don't see this as kind of a huge problem throughout the state.
PCBs, if I'm not mistaken, a lot of that's going to be more on the utilities.
Transformers and all that.
Still can have. So
there we go.
Again,
That's true.
The ones that are dealing in that world are typically pretty familiar with PCBs.
But the folks mixing maybe listed waste with used oil would be your auto body shop that's using, like I said, a solvent with F-listed waste to clean their paint guns, and instead of paying to get rid of that solvent, they're mixing it in with their used oil to get rid of it that way. And that could occur. Do we see that often? I can't recall seeing that. This is just a way for us to kind of put it out to the regulated community that this isn't a good practice to get into if you were doing it. And now that it is regulated and you cannot do this anymore.
So this is meant to be more of a disincentive.
Right. And it is more stringent
than dealing with an issue that you see commonly.
And like I said, we did already amend this back in June, and it is more stringent than federal regulations. VSQGs are still at the federal level allowed to mix listed waste with used oil. The caveat is if they tested that waste and it is now characteristic, so now the used oil is now like ignitable, which would probably be the only characteristic that would be seen, then it would have to be managed as a hazardous waste and not a used oil. And that, like I said, it's just something we haven't seen much.
What
And
is the plan for telling them?
what's the plan for towing them? When we go out on inspections and they have used oil, we would inform them, and also at our trainings that we hold for the regulated community in October, this will definitely be a bullet point. Anytime we have changes to the regulations that affect the generators, then we make sure that we emphasize that at our trainings to know that there has been changes to the regulations that would affect them.
Yeah, I would just add that for large quantity generators and small quantity generators, you're not allowed to do this. You've never been allowed, and so really this goes along with our VSQ requirements in the state. We're going to be more stringent because the feds largely don't regulate VSQs, and so we want to extend that limitation onto VSQs that's already required for LQGs and SQGs.
Is that it, Liz? Is that it, Liz?
Yes, that answers my question. Thank you.
Has there been any pushback from the regulated community at all on any of these?
I mean, for the public comment period, we didn't have any
no
comments on it. So, and like I said, I don't expect to see this affect anybody. If they're doing it now, they probably shouldn't have been doing it because it probably affected the used oil that was supposed to be recycled. So,
okay. Any public comment from the floor? Go ahead, Jennifer.
So this one also has an errata sheet that you'll need to reference, and it's for the same purpose of making sure that we're properly incorporating the federal regulations by reference.
With that, I will close the record and entertain.
One more thing, this is
sure.
also more stringent. You'll need to use that.
Use your more stringent card when you. Chris, would you care to give it a whack?
Not especially, but I will try.
All right.
I move that we adopt the proposed rules regarding amendment of 6 CCR 1007-3 Part 279, regulations pertaining to haz waste standards for the management of used oil, and the errata sheet regarding the amendment, the accompanying statement of basis and purpose, and the finding therein that the rule is necessary to protect the public health and the environment of the state.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously. And let's see. Timing wise, Brandy, should we go ahead and finish up with David and then have lunch? Okay. All right. So the next item on the agenda is rulemaking hearing regarding amendment to 6 CCR 1007-3 Part 261, Appendix 9, to conditionally delist F006 haz waste generated by Acme Manufacturing at 4650 South Layden Street, Denver. And you have the floor, sir.
Correct.
Did you want to bring anybody up with you? Or?
I don't know, Mr. Stewart, you want to? This is Dave Stewart. I'll let him introduce himself.
Care to introduce yourself, sir?
I'm Dave Stewart with Stewart Environmental, and we're the consultant. Tom Walsh is here, also from Acme, who's the client.
Welcome.
So just kind of history on this. We did do an informational in February, thinking we were going to go ahead with the delisting in May. However, we had some issues with the zinc levels in the waste. The facility was able to fix those issues. So it came back, did the informational kind of an update to you guys in November. And now this is the final delisting for the facility. So the facility overview, Charlie kind of went over that already. It's Acme Manufacturing. They are a large quantity generator located here in Denver. They manufacture steel threaded rods that are used in the construction industry. You'll see these a lot of times at Walmart's and high ceiling facilities holding up lighting, stuff like that. The facility began manufacturing and generating hazardous waste back in 2016. The waste considered to be delisted today is an F006 listed hazardous waste. It is generated from zinc and chrome plating on cold steel. The manufacturing processes include cleaning, zinc plating, followed by either a clear or a yellow chromate, packaging, and then final distribution. The rinse waters from these processes are pre-treated at an on-site wastewater treatment system, and they could treat up to 5,000 to 15,000 gallons of rinse waters every day. So the sludge generated from the wastewater treatment is currently managed as a F006 listed hazardous waste. An F006 listed hazardous waste, it's listed due to toxic constituents, which could include cadmium, hexavalent chromium, nickel, complex cyanide, and that's the basis for the listing. So based on the investigations by the consultant, it was determined that there are one or more of the hazardous constituents that is present in the sludge. However, these hazardous constituents are, the metals were all detected at levels below regulatory limits that would make them a hazardous waste. The sludge also does not exhibit any characteristic of a hazardous waste as required for delisting, which would be ignitability, corrosivity, reactivity, and toxicity. We did have, as mentioned, we did have an issue with the zinc. It was at first go around, we found extremely high levels of zinc in the sludge. Facility went back, made some changes to their process, and were able to drastically reduce the levels of zinc. Therefore, it's kind of in the write-up for the basis for the delisting, talks about methods for allowing it to be delisted. It's not able to be unconditionally delisted because the T-clip and total results for zinc were too high for unconditional delisting. But we went back to some of our corrective action guidance, the contained out policy for zinc. There's two options there. If it's less than 100 times the drinking water standard, which is for TCLP, it is a restricted use, so basically can be sent to a solid waste landfill. And also the total analysis, if it's less than 100 times the EPA residential soil screening, then it would be allowed for restricted use, which means it could go to a solid waste landfill. And this waste did meet both those criteria for restricted use at a solid waste landfill. And that is it.
Dave,
questions?
No.
I have a few questions.
Yeah.
First thing, when it talks about changes to current operations,
sure.
I just want to confirm, it's kind of a semantics thing for me, where it says a major change is any change, including alteration of the current wastewater.
Uh-huh.
So literally, do we mean any change in the following language is just examples? Because the way it reads is a major change in any change, including alteration of the current wastewater treatment process or incorporating different chemicals or reagents. So I'm taking that to mean if you change anything at all,
then they need to notify us.
And these other things are examples of those changes.
Right.
Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Secondly, how did we arrive at annual sampling? How did we determine that frequency was adequate for maintaining process control?
That's kind of been a state standard for delisted waste, is the annual changes. And if they, through consulting or whatever, they do notice maybe, like I said, a slight change, some facilities that may require the solid waste, or the solid waste landfill may require a more updated or more how do I say, maybe quarterly sampling for them to dispose of it. So we thought that might catch if there's a change in the waste.
So if they did purposefully make a change, would that then be looked at? There would be additional analytical.
They'd have to, yeah, they would have to ensure that the waste still meets the criteria for the delisting if any changes in their process occurs.
Okay. And my third question is, this is kind of slated towards disposal being at a solid waste landfill. Is there any beneficial use or recycling capability with this waste stream?
Zinc by itself is not a popular metal. So there's not a lot of opportunity to recycle or reclaim it. So, I mean, we always look at that as an alternative, but solid waste disposal right now is probably the best thing. And what we're trying to do is just reduce the amount.
Thank you.
Question, David, you identified the constituents and the levels, and then there's a statement in here that says if you guys have a significant change in any constituent as part of 264 Appendix 9, what additional constituents do you guys have to analyze for on an annual basis?
Well, it's, if you look, we could pull it up and it shows what constituents right now that they're required to look at. Includes arsenic, barium, cadmium, chrome, copper, cyanides, lead, mercury, nickel, selenium, silver, and zinc.
Yeah, but are there additional?
There aren't.
Okay, so
if there were changes that may, I don't know what changes could occur theoretically.
If we went to a solvent degreasing system, we'd have to recharacterize that waste because there could be solvents that would end up in that waste. Or if we added a titanium plating system, we'd have to now test for titanium. So it would be a significant issue.
Okay, so the protocol would be you make a change, CDPHE evaluates it, figures out if there's more to Part 264 that would need to be analyzed?
Correct.
Okay, fair enough.
I have a question that kind of follows from Laura's question. So you said that we're delisting this is a delisted use then, and at least at the moment, the sludge is going strictly for solid waste. If there was found to be a beneficial use or something, some other way of recycling this sludge, would that fall under different regulations? Would you have to take a look at it, or is this material now delisted for any use?
It would be delisted for any use. I mean, if a facility is able to beneficially reuse the waste, it still has to be managed as a hazardous waste.
Okay.
So even, let's say they didn't do the delisting and they did find a beneficial use for it, it would still, because it's a listed hazardous waste, it could be reclaimed or whatever and the zinc pulled out, but it would still have to be managed as a hazardous waste. With this delisting, if they are able in the future to find a way to recover zinc that makes sense financially, they could do that without having to follow the haz waste requirements. We would probably have to look at what the reclamation facility is doing to ensure that there's proper disposal on their end, because it is a restricted use delisting, meaning it just can't go to the land. It has to go to a solid waste landfill because of the levels of zinc right now in it. So it couldn't just be disposed on the ground. It's not unrestricted. So that's something we would have to look at in the future.
So it would need an approval process.
Probably through the reclamation facility, yes.
Okay.
Not through, I think it would go through solid waste for beneficial use
Oh,
determination.
instead of hazardous waste.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. That makes sense. Thank you.
Would there be an attempt at some point in the future to get an unrestricted use? No, there's too much.
The zinc levels are too high. I don't see that happening.
Liz, any questions, comments?
The other commissioners asked the questions I had written down.
Okay.
Got one question. So is this waste static, or can it change from time to time, even if there aren't operational changes? And I guess what I'm getting at, testing it annually doesn't seem very frequently.
It really doesn't change. I mean, it's a process. It's an automated line. We run the same things all the time, so it really doesn't change very much. There is some variability. If we saw wild swings in the variability on the statistical sampling that we did, I'd agree with you, but we don't. The standard deviation is pretty small. So I've delisted, I don't know, probably 10 metals in the state of Colorado, 10 plating operations, and all of them we see yearly sampling, and we don't see a lot of variability in that sampling.
And also bear in mind that to have a wastewater treatment system, they are permitted through their POTW. So their POTW, I think if there was some weird changes in the water being discharged, they would notice that. And then there's kind of a second net there to find some issues if somehow something was wrong with their wastewater or their processing system. Correct. So that's kind of that's the only way you could have it delisted, is that it is permitted also through a POTW.
What sort of regularity do you test for the POTW?
Monthly.
Monthly.
So that kind of generated another question then. So I'm not always confident a POTW will catch that. It depends on their sampling frequency, how often they come to your site. But if there's an upset or a bypass condition, then you would still have requirements for reporting that through the wastewater permitting process.
Oh, absolutely.
Correct? And that could prompt then having to take additional samples.
Correct. But so the waste treatment system is a ceramic microfilter. So that's a really high-tech system. We don't see any issues with that.
Okay.
It'll shut it down before it allows it to discharge. So we just haven't seen any issues, and it's been running well since the beginning.
Anybody else? Go ahead, Randy.
Commissioner Adam, I just had a couple items to brief the commission on. One minor typo correction we wanted to make is on page 3, line 86, where the reference to paragraph D(i) should be changed to D1.
Okay.
And then just to give you a little procedural information on the last delisting done by the commission was back in 2014. So I think all the commissioners present are new since that time. So how the delistings typically work, if you approve it today, it's a tentative approval. Notice would be published in the Colorado Register. A 30-day comment period would go into effect. If any adverse comments are received, we would file something to pull the delisting back. I believe this is the 10th delisting, and we've never received any adverse comments on the prior delistings that the commission has done. And the majority of them have been the same type of delisting, F006. So I just wanted to point out the timeframes. So with this one, if approved by the commission today, likely the publication in the Colorado Register would take place on March 25th, allowing for a public comment, 30-day public comment period, and built in a little buffer in case any adverse comments were received that we would have to file a notice to have it retracted. We're looking for, we build language into that if no comments are received, the effective date for the delisting itself would be May 30th of 2019.
So if there's no comments, we won't see it back.
Correct.
If there are comments, we will see it in our next meeting.
The way it used to work was you'd issue a tentative determination. We'd wait that period. The next commission hearing, you'd have to formally adopt it again.
Mm-hmm.
Just to avoid that, we build in the
language in that.
If no comments are received, it'll become effective on whatever date.
Okay. We need to address that in the, okay. All right.
So you just need to address the one minor typo correction.
Right, got that. All right. So is there any public comment? Anybody want to come forward now? Comments? Anybody? No? Okay. With that, I will close the record and entertain a motion from some brave soul.
I'll make an attempt at this. Okay. I move that we adopt the proposed rules regarding amendment of 6 CCR 1007-3, Part 261, Appendix 9, to conditionally delist F006 hazardous waste generated by Acme Manufacturing located at 4650 South Leiden Street, Unit A, Denver, Colorado 80216, and the accompanying statement of basis and purpose and the one correction that was noted. And that's it.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 The motion is carried unanimously. And do I need to do anything before we adjourn for lunch? Is there?
Just
how
say-
long?
Oh, how long should we come back here at what, noon? Is that long enough? Yeah, is that okay, commissioners? Right? Do I have to hit this thing?
Just go for 5.
Thank you. I'm on a very short leash, though.
Yeah, you're right.
I'm sorry, what time should I be back on the phone?
About noon, Liz.
Oh, okay.
About noon, is that okay? Okay.
Well, geez, that's a quick turnaround. I didn't have anybody lay out my lunch today. No, that's fine. That's fine.
Very busy. You have no idea. Yes, looks like it's so much more calm over here for this girl. Yeah, and they're going in. Yeah, so, and they're also, so we the water and wastewater, we have to certify them. Well, that whole process is done by their contractor, so they're currently switching from one contractor to a new contractor right now, and there's just a lot of moving pieces, which tend to be my problem on any given day. So it was so funny. I tried to write the minutes for our November meeting, and every time I would open the document, I would be flooded with emails, calls, problems with water, and then I would go back a few hours later and go, I just can't touch this stuff. It really was. I was like, all I wanted to do was get away and it took me about probably over a month before I accomplished that document. I'm like, this is driving me. Right. No.
Right.
Go for it.
Be the first one. Oh, you think? Oh, well, okay, thanks. Let me be the one. Yeah. I'm a slow eater. I gotta get started, you know. It's to be eating during the meeting. He's got enough salad for an army. Yeah. Oh, that's excellent. I think they're one of the ones that. Okay, so there's a few of them on silver spoons.
Welcome to Centurylink conferencing. Please enter your passcode followed. Please hold while I confirm your passcode. Thank you. Your passcode is confirmed. When you hear the tone, you will be the second person to join the meeting.
Hi, Liz. We're just waiting for a few minutes.
No problem. Sorry, I'm navigating to and from my mute button. Just let me know when we're ready.
I think we're going to get rolling here. Ready? The gavel us back into session. And
I am here.
hello. So I guess we've moved on from the rulemaking stuff, and we're now to an informational briefing, which is the amendment to 6 CCR 1007-2, Section 1 adjustment to annual fees for solid waste facilities. Would you care to identify yourself, sir?
Sure. My name is Joe Shefflin. I'm the manager of the Solid Waste and Materials Management Program here at the department. So I wanted to just give you a briefing on upcoming changes that we're going to propose to the solid waste annual fees. Just a little bit of background in terms of what the current scheme is. The annual fees are found in section 1.7.3 of the solid waste regulations, and it's very complicated, as it turns out, in the interplay between the solid waste user fee, which is the tipping fee that is charged at all landfills, all active landfills in Colorado, and the annual fee. So the solid waste user fee sort of has hierarchy here. That applies at all attended solid waste disposal facilities. And the word attended there is important as it's used in the statute. And that tipping fee right now sits at 70 cents per ton. It applies at all landfills that are active, all types of landfills. So we've got MSW landfills, we've got C&D landfills, we have special waste landfills. And then it applies at tire monofills and EMP impoundments. And the reason that it applies at EMP impoundments is that those tend to be attended in that they are commercial, they are taking waste from a lot of different operators within the oil and gas fields, mostly up in Northwest Colorado, but they are attended, so they get charged the tipping fee. The annual fees apply at solid waste disposal sites and facilities where the solid waste user fee does not apply. So that means, for instance, right off the top, that facilities that are not attended. So we have some waste storage facilities such as non-commercial surface impoundments that would be subject to the annual fee. However, I've got a parenthetical there that we'll talk about some more in a second, where we've never assessed the annual fee at that, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But that would include things like water treatment facilities, industrial facilities, power generating sites, those kind of facilities. And then also landfills that are in post-closure. In other words, the landfill's already closed. They're in some kind of post-closure care and maintenance. They are no longer attended. Therefore, the annual fee would apply to them. And then there's a category sort of miscellaneous sites that includes incinerators, composters, and medical waste facilities where those facilities could be subject to the solid waste user fee because they are attended clearly, and most of them are commercial enterprises. But because they are only doing interim treatment of wastes, that then usually goes to either beneficial use in the case of composters, but to a landfill in the case of incinerators and medical waste facilities, we charge the solid waste user fee at the landfill, so we're not charging it at the incinerator or the medical waste facilities. The way these were set up back in 2008 is that everybody pays the same amount, and currently that's $1,000 per year per facility. So what we wanted to do is a couple different things, and we've been meaning to get to this for a while, and it's just now is finally the time. We wanted to revise the post-closure fees at $1,000 per year for some of these small closed landfills. It's a pretty burdensome fee. We also wanted to begin assessing the annual fees at surface impoundments. We had specifically set that aside back in 2008, I think, or 9, when we significantly revised Section 9 of the regulations. We set aside the annual fees specifically in some language that I think you've seen in the statement of basis. Well, no, you haven't yet seen that. But anyway, we had some language in the statement of basis and purpose that specifically said that we think a tiered approach is appropriate for surface impoundments. And until we get around to setting that up, we're just not going to assess any fees. So that's been the case ever since 2009. We also wanted to add a category of annual fee for solid waste for facilities that are paying the solid waste user fee or would have paid that fee, but have become inactive. Maybe they're inactive because market conditions, like for instance, we have a couple of exploration and production impoundment facilities that are currently inactive. Normally that would trigger closure, but in this case, we have been sympathetic to their claim that it's a market condition as to why they are currently not accepting any wastes. We don't want them to have to go through the whole closure and essentially take themselves out of the market when in fact things may change in the next few years and they may be able to continue to operate. So they're in mothball status. They're not paying any solid waste user fee because they're not taking any waste, but we're still spending quite a bit of time regulating them. And so we're adding a category for that kind of a facility. And then one of the things that we found in looking at this is that the regulations are two parts, one for active facilities and one for closed facilities. We're going to roll that into one section, and I think we can do some pretty good simplification and clarification in the rules. So that's what we're trying to achieve. A couple things that we found in this process. We thought it was going to be a pretty simple thing to do. It turns out that when we got to digging into the statutes, it's actually a very complicated statutory scheme that we're inheriting here. The solid waste user fee is laid out in Title 25. The annual fee is laid out in Title 30. Those two different titles don't use the same terms the same way. And so what we thought was a pretty easy scheme turned out to be pretty complicated. So what we're going to do is at the same time that we are taking this draft rule and statement of basis and purpose out to public comment and through a stakeholder process, we have also developed a solid waste program policy that explains how we are interpreting the statute and how we think those statutes mesh together and work together. So we're going to take all three of those things out to a stakeholder process starting next month. So just a summary of some of the things that we're proposing in this draft rule. We're going to leave active facilities at $1,000 a year unchanged, but we're going to take the inactive facilities. So all those that are either inactive because they're waiting on market conditions to improve, or they're inactive because they've closed and are in post-closure, we're going to take that annual fee down to $500 a year. As I mentioned before, we're going to collapse the two parts of the rule into one part. We're going to set two tiers for impoundments. The Section 9 rules define two types of impoundments, Type A and Type B. Type A are low-risk impoundments. Those are going to continue to have an annual fee of $0 since we haven't been charging impoundments an annual fee. And then the Type B impoundments, which we think there's about 30 of those facilities, are the higher risk facilities, and we're going to charge them $1,000 as an active facility, just like the first bullet on the page. And that's new, as I have explained. We're going to split the composters into 3 tiers, and those again are based upon the statutory tiers that are already defined in the composting rules. Class 1 are very low risk and simplistic facilities. Those are going to have no annual fee. Class 2 are going to be $100. Class 3, $1,000, which would remain unchanged. So both the Class 1 and Class 2 facilities right now are being charged the annual fee at $1,000. So those would be decreases. And then, as I mentioned before, we're adding the category for inactive facilities. So let me show you this. I know this is pretty small, but this is sort of a before and after the rule change. The green columns there, well, the columns down the left-hand side are just the different types of facilities that would be subject to the annual fee, either currently or under the new rule. The green columns, which are the first ones you come to, are the current scheme. So everybody's getting charged an annual fee of $1,000. You can see the relative number of facilities in each of those categories and how much revenue that generates. So if you look at the bottom of the far right green column, you see that we're currently collecting $55,000 a year in annual fees. The next three columns then are what the new scheme would be, where some of the fees are $1,000, some of them are $500, some of them are $0. You can see again the relative number of facilities and what those totals would come out to. And then the last column on the far right is the net change. And so what you see here is you see some decreases and some increases. The biggest increase is the first one that says new. That's the type B impoundments. Again, I said there was about 30. So that's $30,000 at $1,000 a piece. That would be new revenue. And then the other new one is down at the bottom, which is the inactive facilities. There aren't very many of those. And at $500 a piece, that's not a lot of money. So the net change after all this work we did is $22,000 a year. So this is not a big financial swing one way or the other, but it is something that we think has been needed for a while for the reasons that I stated earlier. So that's really it. Oh, just a word about the stakeholder process. Just on Friday, I sent out an email to 95 different stakeholders, inviting them to a meeting on March the 18th. That's the only meeting we have scheduled so far. We'll schedule additional meetings if we need them. The idea would be to come back in May to you for a rulemaking with all of the stakeholder issues resolved by then, if we can. If we're not, we can, if there are some intractable issues, we can bring them to you. But generally, we try not to do that. And if we still think we can work out something, then we'll just defer the rulemaking until August. But so the stakeholders that we've sent out the email to are the current annual fee payers, and then the type B surface impoundments, which would be a new group of payers. And then because we have so many of our stakeholders that are involved in Colorado Counties, Inc., CCI, we've invited them, as well as SWANA, which is the Solid Waste Association of North America, the Colorado chapter. Again, that just picks up a lot of our stakeholders that are in the consulting world and in the solid waste operators. So that is the last slide. So any questions on that?
Joe, on your new type B impoundments, how are you defining high versus low risk? Just out of curiosity.
I'm trying to remember the regulatory requirements. Do you remember that? Well, you might know that.
Just in general, yeah.
The type A is basically almost meets drinking water standard.
Okay.
The type B facility is basically any impoundment that has some type of waste in it. Very general terms.
Okay.
It is almost that from my perspective, not the regulated entity's perspective. The type A impoundments are primarily drinking water treatment facilities where the impoundments are receiving alum sludge, which is usually very low toxicity, very low risk. And then the type Bs are really anybody that has any kind of more complicated waste than that, either an industrial waste or some other kind of waste that has the possibility of being more toxic.
Okay, thank you.
Just a question, I guess, to follow up a little bit, Joe. So several of us are still characterizing our impoundments.
This is O'Connell Chapman, and I'm wondering, do you anticipate lowering the fees for compost facilities, encouraging more of the rural outlying areas to start composting?
Well, the scheme that we are proposing here is that the class ones would be 0 fee, the class twos would be $100 a year, and then the class threes would be $1,000 a year. That's already quite a decrease for the class ones and class twos, which tend to be more numerous and they tend to be less sophisticated. So because they aren't accepting, for instance, anything like biosolids or anything like that for incorporation into their compost. So they tend to be the ones that are in the rural parts of the state. So I think we're already doing that in this proposal.
And so by lowering the fees, it would actually make it easier for some of our rural areas to engage in compost operations at the class 1 and 2 level.
Yes, I mean, in the sense that at least the fees are not disincentivizing that activity. You know, they still have to be compliant with the compost rules elsewhere in the regulations.
Go back to Chris.
Quick question, Joe. I think you mentioned the 30 impoundments that you suspect are type B. What about those that are still in the characterization process? Have you kind of assumed one way or the other? Or are those just another population out there?
I think at the moment we would just wait. We wouldn't assess the fee until we had a read one way or the other. Again, I mean, this is not a big moneymaker for us. So to the extent that we've been in a holding pattern for surface impoundments and we need to wait a little while on some of them, that's fine.
But your number of 30, where does that come from? Is that just sort of an estimate, or?
Well, we've worked with our permitting staff to try to come up with as close of an estimate as we can. We know that we're probably a little off. It may be 25, it may be 35. So I think 30 is just a good planning number at this point.
That's all the questions we have for you.
Thank you very much.
You in May, if not before. Moving on. Looks like we have another informational briefing. Training requirements for landfill operators. That's an amendment to 6 CCR 1007-2 Section 3. And here comes Ed. Would you care to identify yourself, sir?
Sure. I'm Ed Smith, Unit Leader for the Solid Waste Compliance Assurance Unit with the Hazardous Materials Waste Management Division. So I didn't have a formal presentation. It's not a change to any existing regulations. What the division is proposing today as an information briefing is actually adding a new Section 3.3.8 to the solid waste regulations. And so this would be a new section that addresses training requirements specifically for landfill owners and operators. And the reason that we're kind of looking at doing this is currently the regulations for solid waste sites and facilities only requires training in the recognition of 2 types of waste, that is hazardous waste and PCBs. And so, you know, the hazardous waste regs have been around since 1980. I feel like in Colorado, our generators are pretty sophisticated. They get an annual training. We've got a customer technical assistance line. There's just a lot of avenues out there for them to recognize that, you know, hazardous waste can't go to a solid waste landfill. And the other waste that requires specific training is in the recognition of PCBs, which are kind of being phased out. So there's a lot of other wastes out there that are prohibited from entering a solid waste landfill, either by regulation or in accordance with the facility's engineering and design and operations plan, or the EDOP. But there's no requirement to actually do training in the recognition and the restriction of those types of waste. So that's one of the things that we're looking at. Owners and operators of the landfills would have to put together a training plan that would include training in the recognition not only of hazardous waste and PCBs, but any other wastes that are prohibited by their EDOP. So another aspect that we're looking at is requiring specific training in the major elements of the EDOP. We trying to do annual inspections at various facilities, and especially the smaller or medium-sized landfills. There's a lot of requirements in the EDOP. That's basically the facility's permit, and a lot of people just aren't familiar with all the ins and outs of that EDOP. And so if you're not trained in the facility's permit, then of course there's going to be a lot more instances of non-compliance. So that would be the second element of the training plan. And then the third element is a description of safety requirements at the landfill. I mean, it's a pretty hazardous occupation. Accidents happen all the time. There's a lot of potential for safety hazards out there. So the third part of the safety plan would include training in specific safety elements relative to operations at the facility. Okay. So that's the first part of the rulemaking. The second part deals with documentation. And these were pretty much modeled after the large quantity generator requirements where training requirements are applicable. So you'd have to have the name, job title, and duties of each facility personnel relative to their operations at the landfill. Documentation that they've actually received the training, and anybody new to the facility or reassigned in a position involving the management of solid waste would have to be trained within 6 months of being appointed to that position. And then lastly, there would be a requirement for facility personnel to actually have those records available during an inspection. So we feel like a lot of this is actually ongoing at many of the landfills, and don't think that this is going to be an overly burdensome type of activity. Would increase compliance with facilities permit, hopefully operate in a safer type of manner, and and then those records would be available during inspection. So we are going to have a stakeholder meeting on March 6th from 1 to 3 o'clock in the afternoon for anybody that's interested. We've sent out an email with the proposed regulations and the statement of basis to the solid waste landfills. And we'll wait to see how that stakeholder meeting comes out. So far, I've only heard from a couple of the smaller landfills. Nothing too significant. One thing that we are doing for the small landfills, those that receive less than 20 tons per day of waste, is that we're putting together a standardized engineering design and operations plan for them because they are expensive to put together. And one of the elements of that standardized EDOP would be a new section that deals with training. So we've tried to outline for them what we think the key elements are and give them kind of a boilerplate so that they don't have to spend a lot of money coming in compliance with these new regs. So that is pretty much the extent of it. If you have any questions, I'll try to answer those. Yeah.
Since there are numerous regulatory requirements from OSHA, if they incorporated OSHA training, like doing job hazard analysis and training from that standpoint, or HAZCOM or some of these other things, would that be acceptable too? That if it's something they're doing for another regulatory requirement, they would just need to incorporate that in their EDOP?
Yeah, the regulation is pretty open and it gives the owners and operators flexibility. You know, we don't want to duplicate anything. So if there's something that's already required by OSHA that they're already incorporating at the landfill, then I think that as long as that's part of their training plan, that we can inspect against that, I would see that that would be fine. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Related question, would the training be available from the division, or are you relying mostly on industry consultants to provide the training?
Yeah, the division's not going to dictate what actually needs to be in the training plan, and owners and operators can either, like I said, for the smaller landfills, use the template that we're putting together, and the owners and operators can put that together. They can use consultants, you know, work in coordination with them, however they want to do that. But it's really intended to be site and facility specific.
Okay.
Because the hazards are going to be very different depending on if you're at a large landfill or a very small landfill. So, you know, however the owners and operators want to put that together, we'll be fine with that. But we're not going to dictate to them what needs to be in the plan.
I was thinking of it more as a resource. Would there be support from the division, especially for smaller?
We are considering putting together some guidance on what we think that training plan might look like and what some of the elements might be. We haven't got that far yet, but we are considering that as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Huh?
I have 2 comments or questions.
Okay.
I would hope that when you label this section, that it is actually labeled training program or training plan, because I think a lot of us see training and we think health and safety training. We know what that is. And this is definitely different from that. There is some overlap, but I think it needs to be specified as training program or training plan in the title.
Okay. Training program requirements maybe, or we can work on that.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
And because it is in regard to operations, I think just when I read the 6 months at the documentation of having received training within 6 months, I think that's way too long. I think there's a lot of the wrong material going to the wrong places in landfills for the first 5 months, and then you finally get trained on it in the 6th month. I know you're trying to allow a long enough time, but I think it should be shorter.
And we can tighten that up. That came right out of the hazardous waste rules. But through the stakeholder process, we'll be able to get a better feel for that. You know, maybe 30 days is adequate. I don't know what the right requirement is, but 6 months, we might need to tighten that up a little bit.
Yeah, it says you're serious
Right.
about it.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Any other questions?
Commissioner O'Connell Chapman, any questions?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. One, so since CDPHE is not going to dictate the training, how are you going to evaluate that the training is useful and meets our standards and it's not just a ineffective way of meeting the criteria?
Well, it's the same way with the hazardous waste program, where we rely on the owners and operators to identify specific hazards at the facility and what facility people need to be trained in. And we are going to be relying on the owners and operators to identify those elements. Certainly, if there was a major gap in the training program and we saw a number of violations, that would be a good indication that maybe they're not trained in the requirements of the EDOP per se, or if, you know, the training on safety requirements and emergency response was lacking, you know, we'd make a recommendation for them to beef up the training plan in those areas. But for the most part, we are relying on the owners and operators to put together the plan.
Oh, okay. And so does that mean that the owners and operators can provide the training to their staff on their own, or they will have to purchase training from the outside?
Yeah, that's a good question. We think that most of the facilities will be able to do on-site training, in-house training. If they feel like, you know, they need to hire a consultant to help out with that, that would be up to them. But if they wanted to do in-house training, that would be acceptable to us as well.
I just wanted to add on that point, that's not unusual. It's how a lot of the hazardous waste training is done.
Yeah.
The inspectors come out, they look at your training content and your documentation. But largely, if you have staff that can do that training, that's very common for it to be done that way.
Yeah, I would agree.
Were you finding it that without this training, there were some regulatory compliance issues that came up that sort of prompted this approach or this concept?
Yeah, you know, we're trying to get out to all the landfills on an annual basis, and particularly with the smaller landfills, you know, a lot of the rural communities, you know, they might be part of Road and Bridge, they might be the county coroner. Basically, the operators have many, many hats, right? And so their unfamiliarity with the EDOPS is a problem. And then we go out and do an inspection and we start citing all these violations, mostly because they weren't familiar with the requirements in the permit. And so, yeah, that has been an issue. But overall, we're finding that a lot of the facilities could beef up their safety training and, you know, training in other prohibited waste, not just hazardous waste and PCBs, is something that we feel like could go a long way to protecting human health and the environment and keeping some of those restricted wastes out of the landfill as well. So yeah, I would say compliance has come a long way, but this would be a next step in making sure that, you know, everybody's getting the training that they need and some of those restricted wastes aren't making their way to the landfill. So.
Anybody else? I think we're all set. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, that being done, the next informational briefing is on amendment to the 6 CCR 1007-3, parts 260, 61, and 62, safe management of recalled airbags. Might as well identify yourself.
All right, you guys get to hear from me again. Once again, David Foster. I'm an environmental protection specialist with the Hazardous Waste Compliance Enforcement Unit. So today it's a informational on safe management of airbag waste, most specifically the recalled Takata airbags. There's a great number of those. So this is kind of an unusual rule that EPA passed, or is kind of in the process still of passing. We hope to have a final rule on in May to speed up the process for this issue that's kind of seen throughout the country right now. An overview of the briefing is how the regulation of used airbags under RCRA, the Takata recall, kind of the goal of what's an interim final rule, overview of the airbag interim final rule, and then the next steps nationally and also here at the state level. So gas generating airbags, both Takata and non-Takata, have an explosive propellant that exhibits the hazardous characteristic of ignitability and reactivity. Typically, if there's no recall involved, there's a number of exemptions and exclusions that can apply for the kind of management of airbags under normal situations that have been used in the past by manufacturers and also by dealerships to safely manage airbag waste, basically. This new rule being proposed by EPA will not affect these airbags. Exemptions and exclusions. However, the recalled ones are not able to use any of these exemptions or exclusions. And it kind of states that in the last bullet there. Yeah.
Can I ask before you leave this, are there any TSDF facilities that are actually permitted to take this type of material in Colorado?
Not that I know of in Colorado right now. Okay. There's new terminology. It's called.
I know just by the fact that it has the word explosive in it.
Right.
There's most RCRA Part B permittees wouldn't be allowed to take this in.
Right. Yeah, there'll be certain TSDs throughout the country that will be allowed to take the recalled airbag waste.
Okay.
To my knowledge right now, I don't know if Clean Harbors or Veolia would be allowed to take it.
Thank you.
Yep. Basically, the last bullet states there that the Takata airbags, when removed from vehicles, are viewed as a hazardous waste and cannot typically be reused. Therefore, they don't get the exemptions or exclusions that some of the other airbags may have had in the past, and still may have if they're not going to be recalled. So it's a big deal. The airbag affects 65 to 70 million inflators throughout the country. Basically, it causes like a grenade effect with the inflator. Good thing about being in Colorado, it's typically seen in high humid areas. So in the South, it happens more there. There has been 15 deaths in the U.S. And at least 250 injuries, and that was as of last August. I'm sorry. So it's a huge problem. We want to get, federally, they want to remove as many recalled airbags as they can, and try not to prohibit a mass exodus of these out of the vehicles, and that's where EPA kind of steps up. So how it happens is that the inflators degrade over time, causes the inflator to overpressurize. Therefore, even in kind of low impact collisions, there's been situations where the airbags explode, causing a shrapnel to cause the injuries and or deaths to the passengers of the vehicles. So what is the goal of this interim final rule? Like I said, to ensure that there's no impediment under RCRA for the swift removal of these recalled airbags, that there are, just because we want to hurry up the process, we still want to make sure they're managed in a safe manner, that injuries do not happen during the transport and subsequent delivery to the destination facility. Still needs to be disposed of at a RCRA hazardous waste management facility. Do not want the recalled airbags stored at, let's say, a dealership for a long period of time where maybe they degrade and then there's possible injuries or harm can be done at a dealership or whoever is storing the recalled airbags. And also that the recalled airbags, some of the exemptions for non-recalled airbags is they can be reused back into vehicles without being managed as a RCRA hazardous waste. With this program, we do not, or there should not be diversion of recalled airbags for reuse into vehicles.
Could you repeat that?
So the goal is to not allow these recalled airbags to be diverted back into vehicles. So let's say a car gets in a crash where it's totaled out, but the airbag does not deflate. Theoretically, that can be taken out, sent back as unused commercial chemical product under hazardous waste, and reused by a manufacturer and put back in as a new airbag module or whatever, as long as it is still in its original form. And kind of going back to some of the RCRA basics where unused commercial chemical product is not considered a haz waste if it's reused for its intended purpose.
So you're saying that this rule will allow that still?
Will not allow it. Yeah. To not.
If it wasn't recalled, then it could be.
It could be sent back to an OEM manufacturer, and then they could divert it back into being reused in a vehicle.
So this rule precludes that, even though that's normally a standard.
It is a standard practice for non-recalled airbag modules, correct. So this exemption will provide alternative standards to auto dealerships where the recalls are occurring. Also for the storage of the recalled airbags, but it still does not defer them from the safe management and disposal of the airbag waste. Because of the urgency of this problem of these recalls, the EPA under the good cause exemption, upon publication, this rule would go into effect. And this did occur in November of last year, November 30th. It was published. The 60-day public comment period was a little weird with the federal shutdown. So it is in effect nationally, federally, as to date, with the final rule going into effect in September. So that's why we're kind of expediting this at the state level, try to get the informational this month, and then path forward with the rule proposal for May for this rule. This would have a new conditional exemption for airbag waste, provided the airbag handler sends the airbag waste to either a RCRA designated facility or a new term developed under this rule as an airbag collection facility. So there could be standalone facilities that are only taking airbag, recalled airbags that are not a permitted RCRA designated facility. And I don't know if any of those, they couldn't be in Colorado yet because the rule is not on state, hasn't been promulgated at the state level. And I don't know if there would be any once this rule is put into place. I imagine it's going to be near where the manufacturers are. Takata did file bankruptcy, so that's kind of caused some issues with payment of the recall. But I know a lot of the OEM manufacturers are stepping up and are kind of taking the financial burden for that. So what are the conditions of exemption for this interim final rule that's already in place at the federal level? Is that there can be a maximum of 250 discarded airbag modules or inflators stored at the airbag handler, which airbag handler being car dealership, anybody that's taking out the recalled airbag, they can only store this for 180 days, and it must be packaged and shipped in some sort of container that addresses the risk for the inflator not to deflate and cause any damage or harm during the transport process. And it has to be labeled airbag waste, or do not reuse. And the shipping records must be maintained similar to manifest for 3 years.
Are there any requirements for how it's stored for the 180 days? You mentioned that like more humid climates result in.
Right. Well, like it's supposed to be in containers designed to.
Even while it's stored at the facility before it's packaged and shipped out, it needs to be.
I haven't seen that part of the rule yet. I'm sure it's in the detailed parts of the rule. I don't know what kind of requirements is for the container, like what it's made out of. I haven't seen the specs on that yet, but I'm sure it's laid out in that final.
Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm. So the actual handler, so the dealer, whoever is taking out the recalled airbag is not really considered under RCRA. The generator would then be the designated facility or the airbag collection facility that would take the airbags from the handlers, the individual handlers, kind of throughout the state and throughout the states. Like I said, the reuse of defective airbags is not allowed and would be considered sham recycling. So exemption does include all airbag waste, not just Takata airbag waste, but bear in mind that a lot of airbag waste, there still are exemptions and exclusions for kind of your normal airbag waste that isn't recalled, that gets them out of RCRA. They are able to use this exemption if they want to, if they're not able to use the kind of more broader RCRA exemptions and exclusions. So what are the next steps? I had a typo here. The final rule was published November 30th of 2018. Still kind of within that 60-day comment period due to the government shutdown. EPA plans on publishing the kind of the final rule September of this year, which maybe some changes to that rule, depending on what comments have been coming in during the 60-day comment period. I imagine on the state level, if we're able to get the final rule passed in May, if any changes occur in September to the federal rule that would require us to make changes at the state level, those would take place probably November of this year or January of next year to kind of be in, or February, excuse me, to kind of match up with any changes that may occur with EPA. Basically, it states EPA will kind of work with states on implementing this rule. Like, we want to try to go ahead and get it through as quickly as possible because of the kind of mass quantities of recalled airbags. Bear in mind that we can be more stringent than EPA, so we could not adopt this rule because it is less stringent, but I think makes sense for the state to adopt this rule to help get these airbags out of the system and kind of go from there. Any questions? Yeah.
David, I think you mentioned 15 fatalities and 250 some odd injuries?
Yep.
Was that part of the deflation, or was any of that tied to the storage?
I think most of it's, I haven't heard of anything being from deflation. I think it's from drivers where, like I said, they either went off in low impact collisions, and I don't know exactly on all 15 of the deaths if some of them were just degradation where they just went off without any impact for sure. But I haven't heard of anything being any deaths because of the storage of the airbags.
Do we know what an approximate number of these faulty airbags, defective airbags that might be in cars in Colorado? Is that something Colorado shared before they went?
I mean, I don't think there's a specific number. I mean, Colorado, there's a lot of Honda cars that were part of it. It seems like there's a lot of Honda. I don't know if there's any way to make that breakdown with people buying them and moving. I'm sure the numbers are higher with the increase in population, but compared to other states, I don't know how that ratio would bear out, if it's higher here because of the type of cars that are bought in Colorado or not. I haven't seen numbers for that.
Thanks.
And in all honesty, as an inspector, car dealerships aren't typically notified with us as generators of hazardous waste. So only time we would inspect a car dealership is either if we get a complaint that maybe something's going on there, typically maybe for used oil, or if they have an auto body, they may be notified because they're generating the F005 listed solvent waste. So we may have inspected them in the past, but typically we're not inspecting car dealerships. Especially if they don't have an auto body tied to them, there's maybe some waste tires. I don't know for sure, but typically it's not a facility we would inspect on a routine basis. So to date, I don't know if any other inspectors have, but I haven't been to a dealership and seen if they're storing any recalled airbags now or if they had in the past. So it's kind of up in there. And I don't know, once we pass this rule, if we'll make it a mandate to go inspect these facilities to ensure that they're following these rules. It might be something we look at doing once it's a final rule.
David, I had my airbag replaced about a month ago. What happened to it in the interim?
In the interim, it was, so theoretically, they were all going back to CATA, and then they were supposedly should have been managing them as a hazardous waste and sending them to a designated facility. So in the interim, the OEM manufacturers were kind of taking the place of CATA, so they were paying for those to be transported back and then ultimately disposed of at a designated RCRA permitted facility. So with this passage of this in November, I don't know if some dealerships are using this new rule in Colorado. They shouldn't be because we haven't implemented it yet, but maybe their headquarters is already doing it. I haven't heard of any states passing this rule. You know, in Iowa, the states that don't have their own state programs, that would have become effective immediately for them. So could maybe talk to inspectors from, or EPA folks from that area and see if they're already have this kind of program in place for the airbag collection facilities, airbag handlers, and all that type of stuff. It's moving so rapidly, I don't think it's really taken foot yet. And like I said, we don't have our feet in the dealerships hardly at all, so it's hard to know for sure what's happening. Hopefully it made it, like I said, that's why this is trying to get through rapidly, because there were some problems with the recalled airbags going back into circulation. And also they can still be kind of out of RCRA via the scrap metal exemption if, let's say, somehow a car is totaled and they don't want to take the airbag out and it didn't deflate. There's still ways for it to be considered scrap metal and excluded from certain parts of RCRA based on the scrap metal exemption. But again, we haven't seen that much locally here in Colorado.
Did you get a recall notice? Is that?
Well, I was just showing Jennifer every 6 months for the past 2 years, I received this giant warning that basically told me no passenger is allowed to ride in my vehicle, because it was only affecting the passenger side of my vehicle. But I think since like 2016, every 6 months I received this notification, and they only just had parts at the beginning of 2019 for my vehicle. So.
So nobody
So
rode
it just-
shotgun for 3 years.
Yeah, exactly.
Now safe to ride with Brandon.
Uh-huh.
Well, we don't know, but.
Well, that's
Right.
true. Airbags won't explode.
Well, and it isn't one of the drivers for the EPA rule, the fact that originally all the recalled airbags had to go back to Takata and had to be shipped back to Japan. And so that slowed down the whole process of even getting them removed.
Right. Yeah, and that.
So this allows other facilities to take those
Right. And
airbags.
it's supposed to be less burdensome, and financially, it's a lot of airbags to recall. And like I
Right.
said, I think with them going bankrupt, it caused hardship, and OEM manufacturers are stepping up to the plate. But it's still, like I said, there's that impediment of it being a RCRA hazardous waste, which depends. I mean, how many are recalled at a facility per month could put those facilities into being a small quantity generator, large quantity generator. Then they have to notify, change all their status, and EPA just wants to get these out of the system safely.
Right.
So, David, this is O'Connell Chapman. Is the EPA notifying these car dealerships that suddenly they're dealing with a hazardous waste when, as you stated, this is something that they're not accustomed to having to think about?
I don't know if they're notifying
to the state.
I think it's always been kind of an industry knowledge that this is a reactive hazardous waste, but typically they've been able to use the exemptions and exclusions under EPA to not have to manage them as a hazardous waste. Whereas because the recall airbags cannot use these exemptions or exclusions, they now are managed as a RCRA hazardous waste. There could have been instances where they don't know that they are generators, but that's why they kind of push through this exemption to help those facilities out, basically. But I don't know if I'm sure they know about it just because of the mass publicity with it.
Anybody else? Questions? David? You guys noticed how much smaller the crowd gets after lunch?
Yes.
We got through all the rulemaking.
That's
Yeah. Well, the next thing on the agenda is to meet the new director, Jill Hunsaker-Ryan, but she is not here yet, and she's planned to be here at 1 o'clock, so maybe we could do the legislative update. Who's going to do that? Thank you, Joe.
So the legislative update is, I'm giving that because everything that we know about has to do with solid waste rather than hazardous waste. Doug gets off the hook. I think that we have spoken to you all before about the bill that we are trying to run. It has to do with a lawsuit that we lost last August. We don't lose very many, thanks to our wonderful attorneys, but every now and then we do. And this was a closed landfill down in southwest part of the state. It had a plume of vinyl chloride going off-site in the groundwater towards, but not yet affecting, some residential wells. It actually has quite a ways to go before it would do that, but it was moving in that direction. We had been working with this particular facility for 12 years, trying to get them to deal with it from a corrective action point of view, cleanup point of view. And they were doing some things, but they weren't doing them nearly as quickly as we wanted to. So back when I took over the program, I said, okay, enough of this. So we tried to put them under a compliance order. They didn't want to do that. So we issued a unilateral order. And as soon as we did that, they appealed the unilateral order. It went through the administrative courts. It then went to the district court in La Plata County. And there were two issues at stake. One was the fact that this is a county-owned facility. The definition of person in the Solid Waste Act did not include the word county. It included a lot of other things, but it didn't include the word county. So they were appealing our order on the basis of that they were not subject to our requirements. And then the other issue that was at issue had to do with whether or not they were immune to our enforcement, even though we weren't assessing penalties, whether they were immune to our enforcement under the Governmental Immunity Act as a governmental entity. The first issue was not decided by the court, so we don't know whether the definition of person is good or bad yet. But the judge did decide that they were immune to our enforcement action because they were a government facility. The reason that that's such a bad thing for us is that even though technically right now it only is applicable, that decision is only applicable in La Plata County, all the other counties know about this decision, and it essentially makes them all immune to all of our enforcement actions, whether or not there's a penalty at stake or not. So we either need the Court of Appeals to reverse that decision, which we have appealed the case to the Court of Appeals, or we need to change the law to make it specifically clear that our enforcement program does apply to government-owned facilities and they would be subject to our enforcement actions. That's significant because 2/3 of our active landfills right this moment are owned and operated by local governments, mostly counties. So that's what we're trying to do in our bill. The bill has not yet been introduced this year. We do have a sponsor in the Senate, which is where I think we would introduce it first. So we are in the process of trying to work with some key stakeholders to make sure that we can introduce the bill, and at that point we would try to do that. So I think that will happen within the next few weeks. We just don't know yet exactly. So that's the first bill I wanted to tell you about. That's the one that we are trying to get passed because it's just important to our program. A couple other bills I do want to mention, though, that either are introduced already or, well, actually neither of them are, but we fully expect that they will be shortly introduced, and they come from other stakeholder parties. One, which I think we've mentioned to you before, is that there is probably going to be a bill that will try to reinstate the rebate program for waste tire end users. That's the same program that was in place up until January 1 of last year, 2018, and has now been not in place for the last 14 months. So probably that if that bill passes, that would probably restart the rebate program, I would guess, July 1. Which would mean that we would have to come back and probably, if it passes and if it goes forward as a bill, we would have to come back to you and re-promulgate some rules that guide and direct how we implement the rebate program. So probably very similar to the rules we already did, but likely there will be some tweaks to the program. Hopefully we've let the stakeholders know what we think are some things that they could make better than the last time. So if they incorporate some of those, hopefully it'll be an even better program than before. And then the last bill is a bill that is being pushed by what used to be the Colorado Association for Recycling, has now renamed themselves as Recycle Colorado. They are trying to get a bill introduced that would categorize certain recycling and reuse businesses as being eligible for a property tax rebate. They tried to structure it as a tax break. That didn't happen, but I think it's going to be a rebate that right now they're trying to fund through general fund. I don't really think that would affect the commission much, even if it passes. It would just allow these facilities, if they meet the criteria, to be eligible for the rebate. It's designed to incentivize market development for recyclable materials, which is what we need. We already have, we're pretty much, the industry in Colorado is pretty much at capacity in its ability to divert and process recyclable materials. A lot of that, those being sent out of state, which is expensive. So if we can develop markets here in Colorado, that would be a good thing. So those are the only three that I know about right now. Any questions on any of those?
Quick question, the tire rebate program, reinstating that, that wasn't our effort. That was done by somebody like the tire companies, or
It's being done by at least it's being spearheaded by the 2 cement kilns in Colorado, because they use tire-derived fuel. The waste tire chips is tire-derived fuel. They use by far the most of any reuse that we've had in the past, and will continue to probably. So they're trying to
on the recycling part of that, the reuse of that. They were getting rebate money.
Yes.
In the past.
Yeah, and because they're the biggest, they were getting the biggest rebates. So they have quite a bit of reason to do that.
Pretty much positively inclined in the House or Senate or wherever they're. I mean, you think it'll pass?
Well, that's a good question. And the reason that I'm not sure, they tried last year to do this in a divided House, with the Republicans in the Senate and the Democrats in the House. And the reason it didn't pass last year, which could be the problem that it has this year, is that if they reinstate the rebates, they're going to have to reinstate the rebate portion of the tire fee. When they do that, it has a Tabor impact. And because this year is likely to be a tight Tabor year, the legislature may say, we don't have the flexibility to do it, not because we think it's a bad idea, but we just can't do it under Tabor. So that may be its biggest issue.
Anyone else? Liz, any comment, question for Joe?
I'm curious, Joe, the first bill that you talked about that CDPHE is trying to rewrite some of the regs so that it's clear the state has enforcement capacity over local government facilities. You said that it looks like you're getting support. Is there any organized opposition?
Not that we know of. I mean, we expected to have some concern shown by Colorado Counties Incorporated, for instance, CCI. We've been talking to them and working with them, and it looks like at the moment that they will not stand in the way of the bill. But it's early in the game, and they could change their mind based upon the language and where the language gets negotiated and all that kind of stuff as it goes forward. But no, we're not seeing any. Nobody's come out and said we hate that idea and there's no way we're going to support it. So,
Well, except for La Plata.
well, except for La Plata County. That's right. Sorry. Yeah, they will definitely not want us to pass this bill.
What's the likelihood as this goes up through the courts that it'll be overturned?
Well, I don't want to jinx it. But I'm pretty optimistic that the Court of Appeals is not going to uphold the district court's decision. And my understanding of the district court's decision is that it's not consistent with other case law or the way the statutes were intended or written.
And I'm presuming La Plata's objection is it's a cost issue for them.
I think their objections are more than cost. I think their objections, are yes, based on cost, but also just based on not wanting to be enforced by the state. Their position throughout has been that they have co-equal enforcement authority and that they should be making their own decisions, and that the state is really only here to help them and guide them, but we can't require them to take action, and that the statute was intended, to provide the counties with their own oversight, not with state oversight.
And we agree with that to the extent that we are both oversighting private entities. But when we're oversighting a publicly owned entity, how does one regulate themselves?
Right.
None of us are good at that.
Do you have bipartisan support in your sponsorship?
Well, we only have a Senate sponsor at the moment. So no.
No. Okay.
We're done. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Adams, I do have a couple of division updates if you wouldn't
That'd be
mind
great.
changing the agenda while we're waiting for Jill. So I was talking to some of you guys kind of informally. We are undergoing a lot of transitions like all the other state agencies are. Jill Hunsaker-Ryan is our new executive director. Hopefully she is going to be able to join us today. Martha Rudolph, who was our environmental programs director, who reported directly to the executive director, retired in January. And so, and she was my direct boss. So they just announced today the opening for that position. So if any of you want to come play with us, we would be happy to have you guys put in your application. In the meantime, things have been kind of crazy. I'm reporting directly to Karen McGowan, who was the interim executive director after Dr. Wolk left in November, I guess that was. And Karen's kind of doing double duty right now. She's doing a really great job. We have a couple of division announcements as well. Is it okay if I share your news? Mr. Shefflin, over my dead body, has announced that he will be retiring in June 30th. So I'm doing everything I could do to make him stay, and I still got a little bit of time. But so we will start recruitment for his position probably in early, mid-April, hoping to have a little bit of overlap in June with him and his successor. And then I think many of you probably knew Catherine Stewart, who was over our inspection program in hazardous waste. She also retired in January. And not this Catherine Stewart, a different Catherine Stewart. And so we will be recruiting for a replacement for Catherine as well. Is there anything I'm forgetting? I'm looking at the division staff. So the other thing I wanted to update you on was TNORM, Technologically Enhanced Naturally Occurring Radioactive Materials. I think most of you know that we had a bill passed in the legislature last year that gave us authority over TNORM and instructed us to do a report to talk about background levels and kind of get some data gathering and determine where we have data gaps. And then we'll be promulgating rules next year. Our report is due from our contractor on March 1st, so next week. And we will be releasing that for a very short public comment period of about 21 days. And then we will get the final report out May 1st. And after that point, we will begin our stakeholder meetings again on TNORM, and those stakeholder meetings will talk about the report as well as potential regulatory framework for what we want to do. The reason why this could impact you guys is that we believe that a lot of these materials can be safely managed as solid waste. And so most likely the rules will end up being a combination of rules promulgated by you guys for solid waste rules, and then some radiation regulations coming out of the Board of Health. So that's where we are on that. Do you guys have any questions for me?
Jennifer, how does that report get distributed? Like, who does it go out?
Yeah, so we have a TNORM mailing list that we have just been generating, email list that we've just been generating as we've been going through our initial stakeholder processes. And so it will go out through that list. If you want to be on that list, we can you can look on our website. I can actually get Brandy the website where you can sign up for that.
Yeah, because I think the thing that may overlap a little bit with COGCC is the local governmental designees should probably receive that.
Okay.
Just because they will have oversight, or at least need to be aware of it at the county or city level, whichever their LGD is. I think it would be helpful.
And that's a list that's made. Those are designees for COGCC.
Yeah, they're the local governmental designees.
Okay.
So, like in our city and county, they would be the ones. My boss is the LGD for Broomfield.
Okay.
That would be good for them to know about, because some of them may or may not be aware that that report has been generated.
Yeah, and that actually, the other idea that spurred for me, because I can definitely, we have an oil and gas liaison, or actually he's the energy liaison now here in the department, Sean. And so I will have him do that for me, or ask him to do that for me.
That'd be great, just to make sure.
Yeah. And then we also have a local public health and environmental health office of planning and partnerships. And I could get them to send it out to the local health folks as well.
Thank you.
Sure. It. Any other questions for me? All right, thank you.
Now that you've been in the job for a little while, any new sort of directions that you're adding to what's been going on the last few years?
No, I mean, my focus is really has been on the staff, which, as you know from being in the division, are wonderful people with great missions and great ideas about how they're running their prospective programs. And right now, I'm just trying to keep them happy and healthy, especially through this transition period. I think we're going to need to work on, with these kinds of retirements coming up, we're going to need to continue to focus on succession planning. We have been hiring a number of young, very talented staff that will continue to foster them and try to encourage them to stay with us for a long period of time. And then my other focus is on kind of just community involvement, community engagement. And I think we have done a really good job at that, with communicating with our stakeholders and the communities that we work in, particularly in the remediation programs. But I want to maintain that focus and see if there's better ways for us to do that, particularly with our community involvement staff and our websites and kind of maybe upping our social media presence a little bit, and just so that I want our regulated entities and our stakeholders to feel like they're heard, even if they disagree with what we're doing. And so I think that's kind of another thing that I'm looking at. But mostly it's just, keeping the good work going, because this has always been a great division, and they've always done really great work and had great leadership. And I'm just trying to keep that mantle going. So
how do you define your mission? Do you have a concise statement that you've?
No, I don't. But I probably should come up with one. Okay. Okay.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Really diverse operation you have going on.
Yes, it is.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Sure.
Let's see. I guess we still don't have the
I do have one legislative item.
Okay.
This only applies to Chris, Catherine, Laura, and Charlie. That at some point in time between now and the end of session, you will be called before the Health and Human Services Committee of the Senate for your Senate confirmation hearing. I have not been contacted yet, so I don't know when that will occur. The committee meets on Thursday afternoons at 1:30, so it could be any Thursday between now and the end of session. But I will try to coordinate a time when you all can be available to present, to go as one body before them and be peppered with questions.
Looking forward to that.
And I have heard that there have been some doozies coming out of some of the committees. So hopefully we'll make sure we get you guys nice and prepped up. I have to go through my own hearing on a different matter, so I'm right there with you on being nervous.
So, Brandy, what should we do here?
Well, why don't we move on and talk about the May meeting agenda? I'm trying to receive confirmation that she's coming, but I'm not getting a reply back. So the May meeting agenda, of course, based on the briefings today, you'll see those 3 rulemaking hearings, assuming everything goes to plan in the stakeholder process, and the division will be prepared to file those notices. We'll have 1 informational briefing for a hearing coming up in August related to engineering, design, and operation plans and expiration dates, some changes to those regulations. August may be our meeting date where we decide to travel to another location in the state. So keep in mind where you might want to travel to. You don't have to go back to Fort Morgan if you don't want to, but it was interesting.
It was a good trip.
I didn't know what a sugar beet looked like, so. Also on the May meeting date, which is May 21st, I should mention that. Let's start at 9 a.m. that day. And included in that will be about 3 to 3.5 hours of training that you all are required to complete as members of this commission. A newly instituted annual commission training based on some legislation last year. All boards and commissions in the state are required to have a formal training every year for their members to go over some best practices and conflicts of interest, a whole host of topics.
For having orientation every year.
Yeah, basically. And then our Office of Health Equity will also be coming in to give their health equity and environmental justice training. So that will be on the agenda, and that takes about.
That's in May, or is that August?
That will be in May.
Do we meet? Is there a retreat also in May? Right, I have
That'll
the
be-
20th and 21st. Why would I?
Oh, I think we maybe originally thought we were going to need 2 days for the training and the hearing.
Okay.
So I think we
can do it in one day. I think we can devote the morning session to the hearings and informational briefings, and then spend the afternoon in training. So also, I should just let you know that if you miss the commission annual training, you have to get it at some point. So we'll have to call you back for your own private session. You can't get out of it by not being here.
Reading our minds.
don't make me do it twice.
Right. Yeah. Like, don't make us do it twice. Yeah, I guess that's the real message is don't make us do it
twice.
And that is what I have in regards to the May meeting agenda. Did you have anything to add? Oh, nice.
That was perfect timing.
Did you practice that?
So,
Hi.
come on up.
Yes.
Just this moment finished with all of our business, and we're ready to meet you. Would you like to identify yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Jill Hunsaker-Ryan. I am the new executive director, and I wanted to come in today and say hello to all of you. Thank you for volunteering and your hard work on the commission. It's such very important work. My background is public health, and I actually have a 10-year tenure at CDPHE, have not worked here since 2012. But I'm also a former county commissioner, former Board of Health member, served on the board with Laura Davis. Nice to see you, Laura. So anyway, I just wanted to come in and introduce myself and look forward to working with you. And if there's anything you need, my door is always open.
Maybe we should go around and introduce ourselves to her so she knows why you find people are sitting up here.
Maybe we'll start over here.
Why am I sitting up here? My name is Catherine Stewart. I'm the other Catherine Stewart. Retired. I represent public at large, and I am a geologist working for Swift River Environmental, doing a lot of solid waste work.
Thanks, Catherine.
My name's Chris Gilbreth. I represent the regulated community. I work for Tri-State Generation and Transmission, which is a utility company. Ages ago, I worked for CDPHE. I worked out at Rocky Flats, so I've kind of been all over the state.
Thanks, Chris. You know me.
Nice to see you, Laura.
Nice to see you.
I'm Charlie Adams, and I've been a consultant for a lot of years. I was at CDPHE for 5 years. I'm currently doing very, very part-time consulting for Opinion Environmental. The project I'm working on right now in that regard is I'm the environmental compliance manager for the National Western Center that's being redeveloped for the horizontal program. And I also represent the regulated community.
Thanks, Charlie.
Hi, I'm Garrett Clemens. I represent the public at large. I spent my career in oil and gas and mining and work with NGL Energy Partners and currently on my second term.
Great. Thanks, Garrett.
Hi, I'm Teresa Coons. I'm a retired medical researcher. I currently live in Denver and represent public at large. I lived in Grand Junction for a long time and served in local government there and on the county health board. My background is public health and environment. And I served on the Air Quality Control Commission for 2.5 terms, and this is my first term on this commission. And I've worked a lot with people at CDPHE in a number of different areas.
Thanks, Teresa.
And we'll go to the phone. We have Liz O'Connell Chapman on the phone with us. Liz?
Hello, I'm Liz O'Connell Chapman. I am representing academia, and I also work for local government. I currently work in the Environmental Health and Sustainability Office at the City of Aspen. And I also am an adjunct faculty in the Sustainability Studies program at Colorado Mountain College. And I come from a background in academia of studying waste and waste behaviors, which is what led me to take an interest in being on the commission.
Thanks, Liz.
And O'Connell Chapman is actually our chairman.
Oh, okay.
Not available.
Yeah, you can't tell because, and I can't tell who is banging the gavel in my place, but thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much for doing that.
You're welcome.
So I think I might be the only other person you don't know. So I'm Jennifer Talbert. I'm the Senior Assistant Attorney General that represents the commission and the department on different enforcement matters and remediation issues.
Thanks, Jennifer.
I'll also represent you as a natural resource damage trustee when you get to do that.
Okay, great. Nice to meet you. All right, thanks, gang.
So while we have you here, would you like to tell us kind of what your ideas are for the future of the department? Briefly.
Sure. So new administration, which brings some changes, but of course, there are a lot of things that we're aligned on with the Hickenlooper administration. But the governor has set out some key priorities for CDPHE. So he's given us some goals to, for example, address the brown cloud and greenhouse gas emissions, to be prepared for emergencies, particularly outbreaks where we are the lead agencies, and to look for ways to save people money on healthcare, which we're an agency that does a lot of prevention. I mean, in fact, that's why we exist. So that'll be an easy one. What we're really looking for there is expanding access to care, particularly in rural areas, and then hitting some health targets like increasing our immunization rate, reducing our motor vehicle crash rate, and increasing reducing people's risk of obesity through healthy eating, active living. And I'm working on my goals to be determined, but happy to come back once those are formulated and talk more.
Sounds great. We'd love to hear from you again.
Sounds good. And I should announce that we have just, I think, put up on the web today the announcement for our environmental programs director. So you all knew Martha, and she did a good job for us, and she retired. So we're looking to fill her position. So let your colleagues know.
Okay. And hopefully you'll let us know how we can help you as well as time goes forward.
Yes. Thank you very much. I appreciate the invitation.
Okay. Anybody else? Questions?
Just a quick question. I also serve on the group that's the advisory board for the state health plan.
Mm-hmm.
And, we've been working on assessment now this year, priority setting, but a topic that keeps coming up in all of our discussions is climate change and how that interfaces with public health. And I was kind of wondering what your priorities are relative to climate change in Colorado.
Sure. I'm happy to talk about that because actually I'm from Eagle County, where, we've been able to see the effects of a warming planet for a while. And so as a county, we made it one of our priorities and worked on it. For the department, I think there's a couple of different angles that we want to come at it from. I mean, one is, from a regulatory perspective, working with industry and seeing how do we reduce our greenhouse gas emissions through Air Quality Control Commission. And that's really looking at all the sectors that are, the biggest emitters. And then at the same time, I think there's a public health role in resiliency. And as as the landscape changes, being prepared for what are the impacts of climate change. So I'll give you an example. At the county level, we were working on a resiliency plan around economic resiliency since we depend on winter sports. vulnerable populations, and also wildfire mitigation and risk. And we almost lost 2 towns last summer to wildfire, and our air quality was simply horrible for about 6 weeks, and folks were advised not to exercise outside. So it's really just trying to prepare for helping communities prepare for the impacts that they're likely to see, and how do they be ready to mitigate or respond to those risks.
Great, thank you.
Jill, your county belonged to Colorado Counties for Climate Action? Is that
Yes, Colorado Communities for Climate Action. Yeah, it's a group of 23 cities, towns, and counties that have come together to work on climate action at the state and federal level. And most of those communities have climate action plans. We had one, and so we're trying to do, by sector reductions. So, for example, Eagle County invested heavily in solar farms, and the great thing about that was not only did we cut our carbon footprint in half, but we were saving taxpayers $300,000 a year. And we had done a lot of energy efficiency measures and started to change out our fleet. We're saving money on fuel. It's just that there's a point where your local government can only do so much and have so much of an impact. And so we've gotten together and said, we want to partner and see how we can get a bigger bang for the buck.
Thank
you. Mm-hmm. All right. Thanks, everyone. Call me anytime.
We need a public comment to that aspect? No. Thanks, Jill. I guess we're done. Is that right? This is the other exciting part. I guess we're all done. Meeting adjourned. Thank you. Thanks, Charlie.
Thank you, Liz.
Thank you.
Yeah, good seeing you. Take care.
So which commission were you on with her? Air quality?
I was on the state board for 20 years.
I know.
5 terms.
I tried to ask a lot of questions.
Andy, you doing, Chris? I'll probably just good to see you.
Thank you.
I could ask her if she was going to continue to live in Eagle County or down here.
I would imagine she's going to be down here.
Yeah,
I don't know how you would begin.
You almost have to.
Yeah, to even do all the work.
Now I know next time I gotta be prepared.
Yeah, well, no, you're that's right. All right.
Why are you not still on the Board of Health?
Actually, that was before Mr. Hickenlooper put term limits.
And
I think they kept me there because I'm a pragmatist.
So your second.
I was never on one side or the other.
After your second term, that was the booted you.
Well,
You turned out.
Yeah. Well, and 20 years was enough. I mean,
Well, I think they did the same thing in this commission as well, right?
Yeah, it was all boards and commissions. I think the thing for me too, it's always hard though because there needs to be some continuity, but you also want to.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And I think for me,
start saying, this is the way we always.
yeah.
Yeah.
Hey,
what's up, guys?
Nice to meet you.
I had my term in the Air Quality Control Commission extended for 2 years because we were right in the middle of all of our oil and gas regulations.
Yeah.
We wanted continuity.
Well, and I think
But
the thing
otherwise,
that board of commission is actually probably one of the more stringent as far as the rules. And I know before I left the board of health, I managed to get a few rules. Because we used to have people that would come in and purposely sabotage a meeting by bringing in new evidence, which they never submitted in writing. And then they, and I usually would scold them when I was the president. It's like,
we do our reading, we do our homework, and when you come in like this and introduce new, I know it's your right to do so, but it also doesn't really allow us any time for consideration.
Yeah.
And so we were able to finally use some of the things that Eric
They were really stringent.
Well, you need to be, because especially you're looking at that highly technical data, you can't just walk in and go here. Ta-da.
Yeah.
What do you mean you're retiring?
Yeah, well,
You're leaving me
yeah.
after all these years?
Well, I'll still be around. I'm not leaving the state or
He's
anything.
not doing the same thing you've always been doing.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Let's get in touch. I'll give you a call and we'll get dinner.
Yeah,
Lunch.
that'd be great.
Bring the girls.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I'd love to do that.
All right. See ya.
Thank you very much.
I will see you. I don't know what spell coffee. Christmas